You are listening to Team Leader Bear, Shifter Romance, the prequel in the P.O.L.A.R series, written by Candace Ayers, narrated by Maeve York. Chapter 1, Serge.
Do you know how many asses I've had to kiss because of you boys and your antics?
I stood at attention with the rest of my P.O.L.A.R unit, my eyes glued to the protruding vein dancing at Commander Chernov's temple as he chewed us up one side and down the other. Chernov pointed an angry finger at Maxim, our IT expert.
Like the time the CIA database was hacked and we had the U.S. government up our asses with a magnifying glass for months, that was about as pleasant as crapping barbed wire.
I cringed slightly and refrained from commenting that, in all fairness, Maxim's participation was never proven. I half expected Maxim himself to chime in on his own behalf. Mercifully, he remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Chernov swung his outrage to Dmitri, our assassin, next.
Then, there was the target, who, by complete happenstance, was shredded so savagely that itty-bitty pieces of him were found strewn throughout the countryside for miles. I spent 4 lovely weeks in meetings with the brass about that one. That's right, yours truly, bent over, taking it up the ass for you knuckleheads until the main office finally called off their bloodhounds.
Dmitri's steely gaze remained fixed straight ahead. He didn't so much as flinch under Chernov's rebuke.
Fortunately, no one has sympathy for serial pedophiles.
Moving down the line, Chernov, now beet red, leaned in until his face was only inches from Roman's. I knew what was coming. We all did. Roman was our team pilot. He never met an aircraft he couldn't ace. Spittle flew from the corners of Chernov's mouth with every word, his features contorted in rage.
This latest stunt. A Helix chopper borrowed without permission. You boys are goddamn lucky you're not all doing hard time right now. If they could prove it, you would be. Yeah, that's right, dickheads. That little caper almost got your asses a decade in the gulag up north. Joyriding in a $25 million aircraft? What the hell were you morons thinking? Alexei, wipe that goddamn goofy grin off your face before my boot lodges itself so far up your ass you'll need a backhoe to dig it out.
As the scolding continued, I briefly considered reminding our commanding officer that while my P.O.L.A.R team's methods were unconventional at times, and the guys had a tendency to blur lines occasionally, we had yet to fail an assigned mission. But as my eyes focused on the drop of saliva still clinging to our CO's bottom lip, I decided against arguing our case.
The problem is that not one of you sorry motherfuckers are submissive enough to follow a direct order. Each one of you is just too goddamn dominant for your own good.
Chernov went back to the finger-waving, this time pacing back and forth in front of us, wearing a crimson scowl.
But this is it. You're all 2 strikes in, and it's the bottom of the 9th, so you jack-offs better listen up and listen good. 1 more screw-up, 1 more strike, and you're not just out of the ballpark, you're...
I cleared my throat. I wasn't keen on cutting the man off, but I knew from experience that it was best not to allow Chernov's rage to continue to escalate past the crimson scowl phase. I can assure you, sir, there will be no more deviations from protocol or, screw-ups. I will personally see to it that our next assignment is completed quickly, efficiently, and by the book. Commander Chernov took a long, harsh look at me before swinging his penetrating glare into the eyes of each of my men. It was a good show, and I suspected the whole ass-chewing would have rattled most operatives to the very core. Not my guys, though. They weren't easily intimidated, which was part of the problem. Chernov was right. Each of them, of us, held a dominant brawler inside. None of us did well with orders, which sometimes made it tough for me, as the team's alpha and leader, to maintain control, but I wouldn't replace any of them. Our missions were dangerous and highly classified, and we often risked our lives to complete our objective. There was no one I'd rather have at my side while in the throes of a life-or-death situation than one of my guys. I'd give my life for any of them, and they'd do the same for me. That I knew, unequivocally. It wasn't until Chernov finally ceased pacing that I quietly released the breath I'd been holding, grateful that none of my men had cracked a joke or had even spoken. Not even Alexei. "If you boys weren't the best operatives I've got, I'd shit-can every last one of you." The commander picked up a file off his desk and reluctantly handed it to me. It was obviously our next assignment. I reached out to take it, but he held fast until I met his eyes. Squeaky, clean, and by the book, I mean it. When I nodded, he released the file and waved us away. "Dismissed." The 6 of us filed silently out of his office, down the hall, and out into the brisk, frigid air of an early Siberian winter. Once outside, the guys cut loose. "At least he didn't mention the time Maxim was caught in the supply closet with the Admiral's twin daughters. Both of them." Alexei slapped his knees. Maxim smirked. "I don't think he knows about that one." While the other guys laughed and cracked jokes about our latest in a long line of reprimands, I opened the case file and scanned the details on the printout. "You have got to be fucking kidding me," I groaned, handing the file to Roman, who scanned the paperwork. "So what? We're overqualified Uber drivers now." Roman handed it off to Dmitri, who took one look, made a face of sheer disgust, and handed it to Maxim. Constantine read over Maxim's shoulder. "More like glorified babysitters." Alexei rolled his eyes. "This is a punishment. Is this a punishment? 'Cause it sure seems like a punishment." The guys were so busy whining like little girls, they didn't hear Chernov approach from behind until he barked out a sharp laugh. "Boy, you haven't seen punishment. If you think this assignment is bad, screw it up. Go on. Have at it the way you usually do. Pull some of your little stunts. You'll get a taste of what punishment truly is." A sinister grin spread across his face as though he was suddenly envisioning us all strapped into some medieval torture device. I popped my neck and ground my teeth. Chernov could amuse himself with visions of torture all he wanted. It wasn't going to happen. Not this time. Because this time there would be no veering off course. No deviations from protocol. The other guys might dick around with the rules, but I took my job very seriously, and I did not appreciate the position we were currently in or the implication that our careers were in jeopardy. Regardless of how juvenile and inane an assignment we'd just been handed, we were going to carry it out successfully, but more importantly, all our I's would be dotted and all T's would be crossed. I'd make damn sure of that. Chapter 2. Hannah. The view from the train window had transformed hours ago into a thick, fluffy blanket of glistening snow. Frost crystals decorated the little window in geometric patterns and chilled my forehead as I rested it against the glass. The chill was a welcome contrast to the warmth of the cramped third-class compartment that carried a pervasive odor of armpit sweat, old gym socks, and cabbage farts. Exhaustion tugged at my eyelids. I considered crawling into one of the bunks across the aisle, but one glance at the bare feet of a rotund, bald man sawing logs on the lower berth changed my mind. It explained the stench of old gym socks, though. Sleep could wait until the train arrived at our next destination, which, if I remembered our itinerary correctly, was a ski lodge. I mentally groaned. I didn't ski. There was the chocolate, though. The lodge claimed to produce some of the tastiest chocolate in the region, and if there was one thing I couldn't resist, it was chocolate. I was wedged into a small bench seat, separated from Hyacinth, my traveling companion, by a narrow, rickety tabletop. Hyacinth rested peacefully, a hint of a smile on her face. Stop staring at me. She opened one eye. And what's with the frown? Who tinkled in your Fruit Loops? I looked back out the window and sighed. At the risk of sounding like an 8-year-old, are we there yet? Almost. I sighed again, louder this time, earning myself a nasty glare from a wrinkled old woman seated across the aisle, wearing a black shawl and a babushka. You should be sleeping. Hyacinth leaned down, grabbed her backpack, and idly rifled through it. I think I have a sleeping pill in here somewhere. If we're almost there, why do I need a sleeping pill? It's a 15-hour trip, and we've been on the train for about 3. You lied. You sound surprised. It made you feel better for a few seconds, though, didn't it? I grunted. No, I never believed you. She snorted a laugh, and I swear the old woman with the babushka almost smiled. Hyacinth had that effect on people. She radiated good vibes that seemed to attract strangers, even dour old ladies. Hyacinth and I met in a tulip field in Holland, and although she was almost 30 years my senior, as 2 single female travelers, we latched onto each other. She was a throwback to the days of hippies and love fests, but I had learned quickly that Hyacinth wasn't all peace, daisy chains, and Joan Baez. Nope. The aging flower child had a steely, sarcastic wit, and she wasn't afraid to use it. The 2 of us had been having a blast together for weeks now, although I was still unsure how she managed to convince me to follow her to Russia. But here we were on the trans-Siberian Railway, traversing the largest country in the world, and, next to Antarctica, the coldest. I hated snow, and ice, and cold. You want the sleeping pill? I glanced at the dusty pill she held on her palm and reached over to pick a piece of lint off it. Pass. Suit yourself. Shrugging, she popped the pill and swallowed it down with a chug of bottled water. Wake me when we get there. As she closed her eyes and snuggled into her parka, I was struck by a sudden sliver of dread. Alone. She was leaving me alone in a crowded, smelly train car? While Hyacinth snored her way through a drug-induced slumber, I would spend another 12 hours alone. Sure, I could try to strike up a combo with a sour-faced babushka lady, but unlike Hyacinth, who spoke fluent Russian, an ability she never adequately explained to me, I'd have to rely on Google Translate. I took a couple of deep breaths. I could do alone. I didn't want to, but I could. I had a substantial arsenal of coping techniques gleaned from a litany of therapists to fall back on. I could do alone, if I had to. A sickening feeling churned in the pit of my stomach. My mind fought to remain calm while also scrambling to come up with a plan to rouse her. Turned out I needn't have worried. Hyacinth's eye cracked open, and the corner of her lip curled. Relax, grasshopper. She sat up and chuckled. It was just a tic-tac. Bitch. I rolled my eyes. Hilarious, Sensei. What's got you so worked up, Hannah? Staring back out the window, I shrugged. I don't know. She raised a brow skeptically. We've been traveling together for weeks. Doesn't that make us close enough to share a deep, dark secret or two? I released a mirthless chuckle. Well, I was just thinking, wondering. I wasn't quite sure how to say it. What the hell you're doing, traveling the globe like a nomad? Now the woman was a mind reader. In the past 6 months, I'd sipped espresso in a Paris cafe, climbed China's Great Wall, traversed Norwegian fjords, rode in a gondola through the canals of Venice, swam in the Dead Sea, meditated in an Indian ashram, and prayed in a Vatican cathedral. Still, I felt as though something was missing. I was like the Tin Man in The Wizard of Oz, hollow inside. To make matters worse, I kept searching, but I didn't even know what I was searching for. A direction? A purpose? The meaning of life? Hyacinth nodded and leaned forward, resting an elbow on the wobbly tabletop between us.
That explains your current Eat, Pray, Love tour.
I let out a breath, a cross between a sigh and a groan, and picked at a frayed edge of the upholstery.
If you ask me, you need to go easy on yourself. You said you just went through a divorce. Give it time. The answers will come when you're ready for them.
She had a point. The ink on my divorce papers was still fresh, as was the memory of the graphic texts on my husband's phone, the concrete proof of his infidelity. I wasn't sure what hurt the most, the texts themselves or the fact that when I confronted him, he didn't apologize, didn't beg for another chance, didn't grovel at my feet. Nope. He filed for divorce. The bastard chose his side chick over me. Talk about abandonment and betrayal. I dropped my face into my hands and groaned. All I want is to regain some joy and enthusiasm for life, but it keeps eluding me.
I hear ya. You're hoping if you keep searching, one day, in some obscure corner of the world, you'll turn over a rock and there it will be, your missing piece.
I smiled sheepishly. Dumb. She shrugged.
How the hell do I know? I'm 58 years old, wandering the globe, sleeping in hostels, eating meals from street vendor carts, and living out of a knapsack like a college kid.
I shifted and tried to get comfortable in my seat. Yeah, well, I had a house in the suburbs, a membership in the local garden club, and served on the board of the Homeowners Association. Take it from me, adulting is vastly overrated.
Well, there is one thing I think we both can agree on.
Grinning, she pulled a sleep mask from a pocket of her backpack and dangled it on the end of her finger.
A nap is always a good idea.
Reluctantly, I snatched the mask. Fine, but next time we're splurging on first class.
Chapter 3. Serge. Vasya Pumpkin was a pain in our collective asses. Our assignment to transport the high-profile politician safely across the country to a summit meeting in Moscow was an insult to our abilities. Apparently, Pumpkin, whose brand of politics ran the gamut from offensive to downright toxic, had recently received a number of death threats. The death threats surprised none of us. He'd been under our supervision for only a little over 3 hours, and already I fantasized about wrapping my hands around his scrawny neck and popping his head like pus from a pimple. The guy wouldn't shut up, and to make matters worse, Pumpkin had friends within the organization, friends whose positions ranked far above my pay grade. When I adamantly declined his insistence that we stop at every god-forsaken attraction along the way, Pumpkin contacted some of those friends in high places, and we received orders from higher up the command chain, much higher up, to accommodate his requests from here on out. All of them, however asinine. Including the current one, to stop at a ski lodge for the night so he could eat chocolate and bask in the banya. I saw red. I addressed Pumpkin through a jaw clenched so tightly I was surprised my teeth didn't crack. Sir, with all due respect, this isn't a vacation to Disney World. We are in charge of your safe transport. In other words, it's our job to ensure you arrive at your destination in one piece. As such, I strongly advise against this undesignated stop. Strongly. It serves no purpose but to invite danger. Pumpkin scoffed. Danger? You boys are supposed to be the best of the best. I imagine you laugh in the face of danger, no? He stubbornly crossed his arms over his chest. Besides, your job is to provide security. If I need advice, I'll write to dear Olga. Roman, seated next to Pumpkin in the rear of the SUV, pushed his thoughts to us telepathically.
He thinks we're on a sightseeing tour. Constantine, Alexei, and Maxim were in the trailing SUV. Khan, who usually remained silent unless asked a direct question, uncharacteristically commented, "I'll be so glad to get to Moscow and dump his annoying ass." This made the other guys laugh. Too angry to laugh, I tried unsuccessfully to stifle a growl. Dmitri met my eyes in the rearview mirror. "Try not to eat him, Serge. I can't imagine he'll taste like anything but bullshit and hot air, considering he's so full of both." Maxim contributed his 2 cents. "Maybe we can rig an avalanche. Bury him alive, make it look like an accident." "Nah, the main office will have us dig him out with spoons," Alexei added. Alexei was right. I didn't care what Chernoff said. This assignment had sure as shit been issued as a punishment. Why else would the organization assign a highly trained team of operatives like P.O.L.A.R to serve as bodyguards? We were called into action when a mission required, a highly trained team of operatives. Yet here we were, babysitting a whiny weasel dick who seemed to think we were rent-a-cops, moonlighting as tour guides. As soon as Sable Mountain Ski Resort, our overnight accommodations, came into view, Pupkin squealed with glee and clapped his hands. "Gentlemen, I'll have you know that this ski resort is famous for its chocolate as well as world-class banyas, both of which I cannot wait to experience." I didn't give a rat's ass about chocolate or banyas. This was an unnecessary risk. What we should be doing was driving straight through, each of us taking a turn behind the wheel. Fucking politicians and their deal-making. The minute I swung into the parking lot of the lodge, I knew something was up. My irritation was replaced with an overwhelming sensation that rippled through me in pulsating waves. My body tensed. The fine hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I had no idea what prompted the reaction, since nothing appeared to be amiss, but I'd never experienced anything like it. Roman's eyes narrowed as he watched me. "What is it, boss?" "You feel that?" "Feel what?" "Everything. Nothing. I wasn't sure. There was something just weird." I was in a heightened state of anticipation, like the feeling just before a thunderstorm when the scent of ozone and the tingle of static electricity hung heavy in the air. Where it was coming from and what was causing it, I had no idea. "You guys don't feel that?" My question was met with head shakes and mildly concerned glances from Roman and Dmitri. So it was just me then. As Constantine and Maxim went inside to get us rooms and examine the lodge's security systems, and Alexei and Dmitri went off to scout the perimeter, I stepped out of the vehicle and scanned the area, unable to shake the unsettling feeling. I assigned Roman the unsavory task of guarding pain-in-the-ass Pupkin. Nothing about the 2-story log building appeared to be awry. Smiling, rosy-cheeked skiers trudged back and forth from the lodge to the slopes. Curls of smoke rose from the lodge's chimneys into the azure sky, dissipating in the crisp mountain air. All in all, the surroundings painted a cheerful picture, but something was definitely off. Finally, Constantine returned with our room keys. "All clear. There are currently 5 kitchen staff members, 3 employees at the front desk, and 4 on-duty maids. The next shift change will occur at 1900 hours. Maxim is interviewing staff now. Our rooms are adjoining and have been thoroughly searched. 2 exterior security camera locations. Dmitri is currently studying blueprints of the lodge's layout and emergency exits." I nodded and turned my back to him, barely registering what he'd said. I wasn't normally distracted like this, but whatever was in the air had me so on edge that my bear was about to burst its way out of my skin. When my claws extended and my teeth grew longer, a wide-eyed Roman took a quick step in front of me, keeping me hidden from human eyes. "What the fuck's going on, Serge?" "Nothing. I don't know. I don't fucking know. I can't believe you don't feel that." I shook my head and fought harder against my bear. It took several minutes for me to regain control, but I managed. An uncontrolled shift? I hadn't had one of those since I was a pubescent cub. I grumbled something about getting Pupkin set up inside. Con raised his brows. "You sure you're good?" I rolled my neck, then flexed and unflexed my fingers, trying to get my bear to chill out. Yeah, there's just something in the air. I glanced over at Pupkin. He sat unmoving, his arms crossed stubbornly over his chest and his nose held aloft. Roman, Constantine, and I waited for him to emerge from the vehicle. He didn't. Finally, Roman caught on. Forcing a neutral expression, he cleared his throat. "Eagle is in flight." Jesus fucking Christ. I rolled my eyes so hard my brain hurt. I'd forgotten that Pumpkin insisted we call him by the code name Eagle, and that we use his list of ridiculous code phrases. Moron. He was human, but he knew full well that we were not. He also knew we didn't need codes. We were able to communicate telepathically. Roman met my eyes. "When this is all over, what say we off the fucker ourselves?" I grinned wickedly. I'd like nothing more. As Pupkin stepped out of the vehicle, grinning smugly, we flanked him and escorted him across the parking area. The closer we got to the front doors, the more intense the bizarre feeling became, only now it was combined with a heightened sense of sexual arousal. My cock leapt to attention, ready to salute. What the fuck? "You sure you checked everything, Con?" Constantine nodded. "Thoroughly. Why? What's up?" "Nothing." I lied. Something was definitely up, something besides my dick. The sensation amplified as we got closer to the lodge. By the time we reached the entrance, I was barely holding on to what little restraint I had left. Maxim met us just outside the front door, regarding me oddly. "Damn, Serge, you look like you're a step away from losing your shit." I grunted and pushed past him into the lobby. The homey scents of sweet chocolate from the kitchen and wood-burning fireplace from the central great room filled the air, but did nothing to soothe my bear. There was another scent, an aroma that I found mouth-wateringly irresistible. It was slightly reminiscent of night-blooming jasmine and musk, and it called to me like a siren song. "Just get the dick weasel set up," I snarled over my shoulder. "I gotta see about a thing." A mouth-wateringly irresistible thing. Chapter 4. Hannah. Sable Mountain Ski Resort was not nearly as bad as I'd thought. In fact, after the 15-hour train ride, it was paradise. We were on the second and last day of our stay. For me, that meant either snuggling by the large fireplace in the communal great room, enjoying the luxurious saunas, or relaxing in my room, which had a view of the ski slopes and some of the most awe-inspiring snow-capped mountains anywhere in the world. Then there was the hot chocolate. So thick and creamy, it was nothing short of orgasmic. I probably gained 5 pounds in the last 2 days from the chocolate alone. I had to give it to Hyacinth. Despite my initial skepticism, this cold weather adventure was just what the doctor ordered to get me over my traveling slump. I'd barely seen the woman, though. It was no surprise she was an avid skier. Today, she was tackling a course called Dead Man's Run. I, on the other hand, hadn't left the lodge since we'd arrived. I had no desire to turn myself into a human popsicle. I much preferred my new love, the banya, which was what they called their Russian-style saunas. I hung out with Mary, a cute blonde librarian from Canada, and Paolo, a recent divorcee who was writing a piece for an Italian travel magazine. They weren't skiers either, so the 3 of us spent hours in front of the giant fireplace in the great room, sipping chocolate and telling stories about our home countries. Today, after agreeing to sleep in, we met up for a late brunch and were now enjoying a leisurely rejuvenation session in the banya. I'd been having a great time until I noticed Mary and Paolo had scooted a lot closer to one another. When did that happen? Paolo's arm was slung casually around Mary, only it wasn't all that casual. And they were gazing longingly into one another's eyes. When Paolo pulled Mary against his chest and they locked lips, three suddenly became a crowd. It was my cue to ski-daddle. I quietly rose and reached for one of the thick terry cloth robes on a hook near the door. I needn't have been quiet, though. Those two were so into each other, they wouldn't have noticed if I'd detonated a pipe bomb. Choking on my envy, I left the heated chamber. It wasn't a pretty truth, and I wasn't proud of it, but if I was being honest, I was jealous of Mary. Not that I wanted Paolo to pay attention to me. I didn't. In fact, I'd sworn off men entirely. But that look in Paolo's eyes, I would have loved just once to know what it felt like to have someone gaze into my eyes like that, with sheer passion and utter longing. I sighed. Lordy, the banya is way too hot today. Well, so much for hanging out with Paolo and Mary tonight. The three of us were supposed to have dinner, but I'd have to change my plans and eat alone. Our tour group was scheduled to leave in the morning at the butt crack of dawn, so I supposed I'd head to bed early, also alone. I sighed again, lost in my private pity party, when I rounded the corner and ran straight into a solid wall of muscle. Serge. Holy fuck. The irresistible aroma I'd followed led me straight to an irresistible woman. And I strongly suspected she was no ordinary woman, not to me. She rounded a corner and practically leapt into my arms. Her scent was so delicious, so tantalizing, my cock tried to burst through my cargo pants. As I caught her, I instinctively pulled her soft, curvy body tighter against me, failing to stifle a groan. Then she wiggled. Oh, fuck. We shifters usually recognize our mate on sight. We might fool around a bit and even become fond of someone else, but once we found our mate, that was it. All others paled in comparison. That was the reason I strongly suspected the woman in my arms was the one, my mate. Every other woman I'd ever known, ever met, ever spoken to, ever seen from afar couldn't hold a candle to her. Never had I experienced a feeling of such unfettered desire as I did in that moment, holding her in my arms. But there was something off. Something was not quite right. I was just about to put my finger on it when she wiggled again, and oh, fuck. I was so entranced by her that it wasn't until her petite hands pushed at my chest that I realized she wanted me to release her. Reluctantly, I loosened my grip. She slipped from my arms and stepped back, allowing me to see her beautiful form. I began salivating. Although she was wearing a thick terry cloth robe and clutching it closed at the collar, there was no hiding her full, plush curves. Her sandy blonde hair was brushed back from her face, and her pale skin glowed with perspiration from the banya. Sorry about that. Her smooth, sultry voice shot tingles down my spine and straight to the head of my cock. Sorry? She was sorry? For what? She flashed a little half-smile and my heart nearly leapt out of my chest. I guess I wasn't paying attention to where I was going. I cleared my throat as I watched her grip loosen slightly from around the collar of her robe. It fell open a sliver, and a low, audible growl came from my bear. He wanted to mount her right fucking there, mark her, claim her, and keep her beside us forever. As I imagined the stunning beauty of the body beneath that thick robe, her voluptuous, delectable curves, I completely agreed. She blinked golden brown eyes at me. I could not, in my wildest, most erotic fantasies, have imagined a more magnificent beauty than the one standing before me. It dawned on me. I was still gaping at her in astonishment. What now? I needed to say or do something besides stare in awe, marveling at her exquisite perfection. And then something occurred to me. That thing I had previously been unable to put my finger on became clear. Despite my intense attraction, I wasn't detecting the slightest trace of shifter blood in her. She was completely human. Impossible. Shifters couldn't have human mates. I inhaled deeply. Holy fuck. Okay, maybe it wasn't impossible. The way she affected me? Now I was confused. This gorgeous creature stood before me, impacting me like no one ever had before, and there was no doubt that she was 100% human. My head was flooded with questions. At the top of the list, what the hell was going on here? If she wasn't my mate, why was this feeling so potent? If she was my mate, if it was indeed possible for a shifter and a human to be true fated mates, was she feeling the same pull I was feeling? Evidently not. I knew a little about how mating worked for humans. They married people who were all wrong for them and ended up miserable or divorced, sometimes more than once. Shifters never divorced their true mates. They never fell out of love. The concept was absurd. For us, a claiming mark was forever, and our love bond only grew stronger over time. Was she feeling anything at all similar to what I was feeling? It was hard to say. Was she impacted by me the way I was by her? That was hard to say, too. She wasn't smiling anymore, so I stood taller and flexed my muscles, hoping to impress her. She didn't seem particularly enthused or impressed. Well, anyway, her voice was like a symphony, sweet and melodic. My bear urged me to say something. Speak, damn it, talk to her, impress her with your wit and charm. Fucking bear. He was right this time, though. I needed to say something witty and charming. But what? Nothing came to mind. Why hadn't I prepared for this moment? I always knew I might one day meet my mate. Okay, maybe I hadn't quite believed it, but I knew there was a remote possibility. Why hadn't I mentally rehearsed something brilliant to say or do, something that would sweep a woman off her feet? She moved to the side as though attempting to step around me. Wait, what? She was going to just walk away? I also stepped to the side, blocking her. Mine. The word left my lips involuntarily. Pardon? Her forehead wrinkled. You're what? This time, my voice was gruff, gravelly, more bare than human. Mine. She looked at me as though I was half crazy, which served to emphasize how bad I was screwing this up. Right. She scooted around me and shuffled quickly down the corridor, looking over her shoulder a couple of times to see if I was following her. I was. In fact, as my eyes glued themselves to the sway of her hips and her round, curvy bottom beneath her robe, I took steps in the same direction, until I was cruelly interrupted. Serge, you're needed ASAP. Eagle has flown the nest. Jesus. Fuck Pumpkin. I needed to explore this woman, to learn more about her, to determine whether she truly was my mate. I considered ignoring Roman, then thought better of it. This mission was critical, not only to my career, but to my teammates' careers as well, and Pumpkin rubbed elbows with some pretty influential people. It was maybe just as well. I didn't want her to think I was some creepy stalker, and I'd done a fairly decent impression of one so far. I'd track her down later and make it seem like a coincidence. Even though I'd chosen not to follow my mate, the only thought on my mind as I headed back to our suites was that I'd give my left nut to be the robe caressing that round, curvy ass of hers. Chapter 5. Hannah. For what seemed like an eternity, I sat on the bus as it idled in the parking lot while others in our tour group slowly trickled in. The driver opened and closed the door so often there was a constant frigid breeze. Much to my annoyance, my thoughts were consumed by the guy I'd plowed into the evening before. I'd even dreamt about him. X-rated dreams in which he whisked me off to a chocolate factory with chocolate mountains and chocolate streams, and we had dirty, nasty sex in a lake of delicious melted chocolate. Too bad I no longer had a vibrator. Due to a mortifying incident at a border crossing, in front of two hot but not so easily amused Border Patrol agents, I decided never to travel with sexual enhancement devices again. Ever. I had a pretty good idea why I couldn't get the big, buff, heavily muscled hottie off my mind. Well, besides the fact that when my body was smashed tightly against his for those 3 seconds, it had been the most contact I'd had with a man in over a year. I suspected the whole Paolo, Mary, three's a crowd thing had a lot to do with it as well. I hadn't been watching where I was going because I'd been preoccupied, obsessing about the way Paolo had been gazing at Mary in the banya, and then, bam, I slammed into the handsome stranger's big, hard, cover model-looking body, and, through what my therapist would call transference, I must have imagined the gorgeous stranger was gazing at me the same way. I mean, he hadn't really had that look of desire, of intense longing, of deep primal hunger in his eyes, had he? It had to have been my warped imagination playing tricks on me. I scooted over against the cold window as Hyacinth boarded the bus. She plopped down beside me, dropping her backpack at her feet. Mary and Paolo were 2 seats in front of us, locked in a passionate embrace. I mentally sighed and sank back in my seat. Hyacinth munched on a croissant. "You look awfully glum this morning. What gives?" I felt something in my stomach tighten, but I merely shrugged and pressed my forehead against the cold glass. "I just feel weird right now." "Weird how?" "Just weird." She narrowed her eyes, studying me suspiciously. "Maybe you can explain to me how we just spent 2 days in a romantic ski lodge and you still haven't gotten laid?" My jaw dropped, and I looked at her like she'd lost her damn mind. "Are you joking? Please tell me you're joking." "What? Don't act so appalled. You're young, you're beautiful, live a little. In my day, we had a thing called free love. Nowadays, we have a thing called STDs. She waved away my comment and continued nibbling her breakfast. "STDs are nothing new. Here, hold this." She dropped her half-eaten croissant on my lap, bent over, and rifled through her backpack. "Besides, there's always antibiotics. And voila." She pulled out a string of foil-wrapped condoms and waved them in my face. "Jesus!" I grabbed them out of her hand so she would stop brandishing them in front of everyone. The door opened again and another sharp gust of frigid air cut through the bus. "Hey, shut the door, would you? It's tits freezing degrees out there and my nipples could cut glass." Hyacinth turned back to me as though she hadn't just shouted that for the entire bus to hear. "Honey, have you ever been with any man other than your ex-husband?" I scowled. "Of course, lots of men. Can we change the subject?" She cocked a brow and continued staring at me. I shrank under her gaze. "Well, not lots, not that many, not really." "Okay, no, none. Change of subject, please." "Sex is nothing to feel guilty about. If you like the guy and you're both single, willing adults, what's the problem? Besides, orgasms have healing properties." I huffed a laugh. "Fine. Yay to orgasms. Can we drop it now?" She shrugged and picked up her half-chewed croissant off my thigh. "The best way to get over someone is to get under someone, is all I'm saying." "That's all you're saying?" I brushed crumbs off my lap. "Really? If that's all you're saying, does that mean you're going to quit nagging me now?" She pantomimed, zipping her lips shut and tossing the key over her shoulder. I rolled my eyes, then caught a glimpse of Mary and Paolo, their faces still glued to one another. I hated to admit it, but Hyacinth had a point. I could really use a non-self-induced orgasm. But in the past year and a half, the only person I'd even remotely had an urge to roll around naked with had been the big, sexy guy I'd had Willy Wonka dreams about last night, a guy who had barely spoken 2 words to me. Actually, he had spoken 2 words. Only 2, and they were both the same. He'd said, "mine." Twice. Whatever the hell that meant. Maybe it was the only English word he knew. Hyacinth was still side-eyeing me questioningly, but I was over talking about my emaciated sex life with her. I dug a pair of earbuds out of my jacket pocket. "As much as I love these come-to-Jesus talks, Dr. Phil," I pointedly stuck the buds in my ears and turned to stare out the window. Just as I turned, I caught a glimpse of dark hair. I pushed my head against the window, craning my neck, trying to see more. It was him, the handsome stranger. I drew in a sharp breath. He was striding purposefully toward our bus, his long legs eating up the distance. Like he sensed my eyes on him, his gaze flew to mine, then he froze. And there it was. Holy shit, I hadn't been mistaken. As soon as his eyes met mine, his expression morphed. This time there was no way it was my imagination. His look clearly held the feverish yearning and smoldering intensity of an impassioned lover. Our gazes remained locked, neither of us daring to look away as the bus finally accelerated and pulled out of the lot. I lost sight of him as we turned onto the main road, but just before I did, I could have sworn he mouthed that word again. Mine. Chapter 6. Serge. I spent the first hour of the morning going silently insane while searching every inch of the lodge and the ski slopes for her. Where was she hiding? How had she slipped through my fingers? When I finally caught a glimpse of her, my stomach dropped to my toes. Her hair was tucked up under a red knit cap, but I would recognize her golden brown eyes, perfectly shaped lips, and button nose anywhere. Hell, I hadn't stopped mentally rehashing every inch of her since our encounter the night before. I was too late. She was already seated on a bus that was pulling out of the lot and onto the main road. I'd missed her by seconds. My bear urged me to shift and follow. Dumbass bear. Yet I listened. Somewhat. I didn't shift, but unwilling to let her get away from me, I continued walking behind the bus without even realizing it. My bear was like a caged animal hurling its powerful body against the man-shaped bars of its prison. I fought, using whatever sanity still remained to deny his demands to give chase. As the bus picked up speed, he threw back his head and let out a deafening roar that ricocheted around my skull like a pinball. Struggling, clinging to my human form, my heart beat out of my chest. I startled when Roman clapped me on the shoulder. "What is it, boss?" I tried to blink away the image of my mate and refocus on the task at hand, but my gaze remained instinctively on the bus, fading in the distance. What if I never found her again? I couldn't let her get away. "Get the motherfucking Eagle. We're getting the hell out of here." "Roger that, but what's going on?" I shook my head. "Nothing." He raised his brows skeptically. "Nothing?" I cracked my neck and flexed my hands, trying to get my bear to chill out. "I don't know." "Pupkin has us all tearing our hair out, but I've never seen you lose your cool like this." "It's not Pupkin." I ran my hands down my face while Roman stood silently, brow furrowed, watching and waiting. I wasn't sure I was ready to share this with the team. I didn't fully understand it myself. Fear was eating me. What if I never saw her again? Gah, I wasn't even sure she really was my mate. Not 100%. Okay, I was pretty sure. I had to find her. Brushing off Roman's concerned gaze, I went to the lodge's front desk and all but shoved Alexei out of the way. He'd been flirting with an attractive blonde behind the counter, but I didn't give a shit. That bus that just left here, where is it going? Startled not only by my intrusion, but also by my harsh and insistent tone, she stammered. Maybe the train station. That was a group on the trans-Siberian tour. Where's the tour stopping next? I don't know, but I have an old schedule here somewhere. She rifled around under the desk, produced a brochure, and handed it to me. Alexei, like Roman, was eyeing me with concern. Is there a problem? I unfolded the pamphlet and studied the map printed inside. To the right of it was a schedule of tour stops. It was a couple of years old, but I was banking on the hope that the itinerary didn't change much from year to year. Refolding the brochure, I tapped it against my thigh. Tell everyone to rendezvous at the vehicles in 5. Alexei's brows shot up. Eagle isn't gonna be happy. He chuckled. Right now, he's having the raisins for his oatmeal plumped. Fuck. I'll tell him myself. Sure enough, Pupkin stood abruptly and began huffing in outrage the moment the words left my lips. Then he took one look at my menacing expression and retreated a step. I've not finished my breakfast. I leaned down so I was inches from his face, wearing my most threatening glower. You do realize the Brava are after you, don't you? His face paled. That's right, we know you're on their hit list, and if they come for you, the only thing standing between you and them is us. I clasped his upper arm and bared my teeth. I suggest you stop pissing us off and get in the fucking vehicle on your own steam, or one of us will put you in it. Understand? He balked, his mouth flopping open and closed like a carp's, before he finally snapped it shut, still glaring at me. Pumpkin didn't get to where he was politically by being a pushover, and he wasn't done arguing. You and I seem to have come to an impasse here. Either he was clueless to danger, or he flat out ignored his basic instincts that told him I was an apex predator and he should not fuck with me. Because he pulled out his cell phone and began tapping at the screen, mumbling something about me never working in this country again after this. My bear continued to shred my insides as our mate got farther and farther away. I snatched the phone from his hand, threw him over my shoulder, and carried him out of the lodge, kicking and screaming. Roman cleared his throat, somewhat shocked, but not about to lock horns with me. All right then, let's get going. Frowning, Maxim squeezed my shoulder. Boss man, you seem to be losing your shit. I brushed off his hand, continuing to march toward our vehicles. Before I reached the SUVs, I threw a home run pitch. Pupkin's cell phone flew right down center field and landed in a snowdrift. I didn't give a single shit about Pupkin or his threats. As long as he remained alive, our job was done. Probably. Maybe. Honestly, for once in my career, I couldn't find it in myself to care. Chapter 7. Hannah. The worst thing about cold weather was having to wear layer upon layer of bulky clothing to combat the bitter temperature. I was dressed in so many layers, every step felt as though I were wading through Jell-O. Not wading, waddling. I was like that kid in A Christmas Story, Ralphie's little brother, a tick about to pop. After debarking the bus and staring out across the vast beauty of frozen Lake Baikal, the deepest lake in the world, I knew it was all worth it. The setting was something out of a fairy tale. Sparkling pinnacles of ice glistening in the bright sunlight, drifts of frosty glittering snow, and a transparent ice floor several yards thick with vast cracks that seemed to stretch on for miles. Bubbles, frozen pockets of air beneath the surface of the ice, were like fossils frozen in time, except these would vanish in the spring thaw, only to return the next winter season. I could see right down through the transparent, yards-thick ice to the plants and stones on the lake bottom far below. Hyacinth nudged my shoulder. "Worth the cold?" "Heck yeah. It's magical, like an enchanted ice forest." She took a few steps, inhaling deep lungfuls of the crystal clear air. "I've been here probably 10 or 15 times. Yet it still manages to take my breath away, every time." I scanned the area, noticing a variety of activities taking place. Some snowmobiles cruised the lake's surface, a couple more tourist groups wandered around, and what looked like a golf tournament was going on nearby. Ice golf? Didn't know that was a thing. Mary and Paolo asked Hyacinth and me if we wanted to go check out the tournament with them, but I begged off. I was still feeling weird about the guy back at the lodge, and I wanted a few moments alone to think. A handful of people in our tour group headed that way, while others were busy with cell phones, video cameras, and other devices, attempting to capture the majestic beauty of a place that I was certain had to be seen in person to be truly appreciated. I shuffled along the ice, both treasuring the solitude and relishing the excursion. But no matter how magnificent the setting or how thrilling the adventure, I couldn't get Lodge Hottie off my mind. I was awed by the breathtaking scenery one minute and engaged in naughty daydreams the next. As I waddled over to a rocky outcropping not too far away, intending to climb a little higher and get a better vantage point from which to view the lake, I was forced to admit that maybe Hyacinth's nagging was finally sinking into my thick skull. She'd been on me since I met her, always encouraging me to have more fun and explore my sexuality, as she put it. I generally ignored her because I wasn't a one-night stand kind of girl. But maybe that was the problem. During the only argument I ever had with Bryce, my ex, after I'd found the incriminating text messages, he'd called me a cold fish, said I was boring and lifeless. Those words had hurt more than I cared to admit. They were, if I was being honest with myself, the catalyst for my globe-trotting. This trip was supposed to prompt the emergence of a new Hannah. Hannah recreated, Hannah 2.0. I'd planned to find my wild side and let her loose. But had I done that? Not really. Was I really any different? Again, no. The only thing that had changed was the scenery. Different setting, same old Hannah. Hyacinth, with all her prodding, had only been trying to encourage me to step outside the box, and she was right. Maybe what I needed was a random hookup with a handsome stranger. Or not. I didn't know. Climbing the small, snow-covered embankment wasn't easy with my almost 20 pounds of snowsuit. Between the layers of clothing, the boots, the hat, the hood, not to mention the scarf obscuring my vision, the climb was awkward. I only got halfway up before my foot slipped, nearly sending me back down in a heap of nylon and synthetic goose feathers. I took a deep breath and vowed to be more careful, but as I tried to continue, I found I couldn't lift my right leg. It was jammed between two chunks of solid ice. I jiggled it as much as my limited mobility would allow, but my leg only sank deeper into the crevice. The bottom of my leg, halfway up my calf, was stuck. I fought and wriggled, only to stumble forward and get my other foot stuck between two ice chunks. Laughing at myself and my ridiculous Lucille Ball moment, I continued to struggle. My clothing was too heavy, I was wedged in too tightly, and my muscles were virtually non-existent. I knew I should have hit the gym more, or at least gotten myself a membership. I called out to my group. That was when I started to panic. Where was my group? I brushed the hood of my parka out of my field of vision. I didn't see anyone. None of the other tourists were anywhere in the vicinity. How had I wandered so far from the others? Now I was stuck like a fly on tar paper, and there was no one around to help. I wasn't sure how far I'd wandered or how long I'd been walking. I didn't even see the bus anywhere. I reached down and tried to grab my leg to yank on it again, but my mittens were massive. When I tugged, I just ended up falling over and face-planting into a foot of snow. And now my leg was wedged even tighter. Ugh. I managed to roll onto my side a bit and brush some of the snow off my face with my mittens, but I couldn't get back up. "Hyacinth!" I slapped at the snow and grunted as I tried to wiggle out of my self-made trap. "Mary? Paolo? Anyone? Help!" My pulse quickened. Surely I wouldn't be left behind. People would notice that I wasn't with the group, that I wasn't on the bus. Hyacinth would never allow the tour to continue to the next destination without me, unless she was distracted and didn't notice I was missing. But she'd realize eventually and come looking for me. She'd dispatch a search party. How long would that take, though? What if I froze to death before they found me? Fear squeezed my chest like a vice. I'd never had a panic attack before, but in this situation I just might have my very first one, and it would be a doozy. I called out again. My voice sounded quivery and weak. Although my movement was limited, I was able to turn my head a few inches and scan the lake. A dark shape caught my attention. As I continued to watch, it grew larger. It was headed my way. Within a few seconds, I could make out a hulking figure running toward me. Thank God. My heart nearly thumped out of my chest as long legs tore across the ice with uncanny agility. When his handsome face came into view, I was flabbergasted. I recognized those piercing eyes right away. My sexy stranger, Lodge Haughty. A flush of warmth flooded me. It seemed my body remembered how good it had felt to be plastered against him and began dispatching hordes of butterflies to the general region of my midsection. The snowy terrain was no match for the stranger's heavy boots and solid leg muscles. He moved as though traversing icy, snowy ground was second nature to him. He was huge, taller than any man I'd ever encountered, and solidly built. When his thick arms reached down, I spotted bulging muscles under the thin coat he wore. Wasn't he freezing? His hands slid under my arms and he hoisted me up like I weighed nothing. I gasped in surprise, both at his strength and at the fact that the man I dreamt of last night, the man I'd left behind this morning at the ski lodge, had just rescued me from potential frostbite or death. Time seemed to slow. He didn't immediately release me. I remained in his arms, held tightly against his chest. A glance at his face turned my stomach's butterflutters up a notch. Slowly, gently, he lowered me to the ground. As I slid down his hard body, even through layers of puffy snowsuit, the solid muscle and hard planes of his maleness were evident. I cursed the cold in my Pillsbury doughboy winter wardrobe. My eyes were riveted to him. My mittens refused to leave his chest. I needed to say something before it got weird. No, it was already weird. What was he doing here? The way his eyes bore into me was unsettling, but panty-melting. I should thank him for saving me. I licked my lips nervously. I didn't expect to see you here. Did you follow me? No, of course you didn't. How would you know where the bus was going? There was no way you could have known that. Besides, why would you follow me? It must have been a coincidence. Wow, the world sure is full of crazy coincidences, isn't it? I knew I was rambling, but nerves got the better of me, and I seemed powerless to shut up.
Anyway, you may have just saved my life. I mean, I was stuck and I couldn't move. Somehow I wandered away from everyone, not on purpose, but I was trapped and there was no one around. I tried to call out, but there was no one to hear me until suddenly there you were." His brows drew together and his head cocked to the side, like he was trying to figure me out. I, however, just kept babbling like a fool. "You saved me. You're a hero. My very own hero. I suppose I should thank you. Yes, I should definitely thank you. So, well, thank you." He loomed over me. His ruggedly masculine features held a look that most definitely made my nether region tingle. And I shouldn't have done it. I knew I shouldn't have done it, but powerless to resist, I did it anyway. I leaned up to give him a quick thank you kiss. I was aiming for his cheek, but a split second before my lips touched his face, he turned, and my kiss landed on his luscious, pillowy lips. It was supposed to be a chaste peck, but pulling my lips away from his suddenly seemed like a monumental task. We were like two poles of a magnet, north and south, highly attracted and once together, difficult to draw apart. The kiss started out gentle, with innocent intent. Okay, somewhat innocent intent, but quickly became hungry and impassioned. His lips were pillowy yet firm. He quickly took control, capturing my mouth with his. Raw, blazing heat engulfed me. I reached up with my mittened hand and pulled his head closer. His tongue grazed past my lips and tangled with mine. I could no more stop the little whimper that escaped my throat than I could control the pressure in my breasts as my nipples hardened to sensitive little peaks. His scruffy 5 o'clock shadow brushed my face, and a growling sound emanated from his chest, vibrating all the way to my clit. His large hand cupped my ass, and through all the layers of clothing, made me ache for more. I was so hot I should have been worried that the ice beneath us would melt away. The fingers of his other hand slid beneath my hat and tightened. At the light sting of my hair being pulled, I pressed myself against his taut frame. Who knew I'd like hair pulling? I grasped his neck, cursing my gloves the whole time. My body ignited like a forest fire. I melted into him, completely forgetting my own name as our tongues tangled. He tasted like my favorite things, chocolate and coffee and man, and I sucked his tongue gently, desperate for more of his intoxicating flavor. "Hannah?" Mary's call brought me crashing back to reality. I gasped when it dawned on me that I was practically mauling a complete stranger. A hot stranger who may have just saved my life, but a stranger nonetheless. I stared up at him, mortified. What had just come over me, muddling my thoughts and making me behave so boldly? Despite the frigid temperature, my cheeks burned in embarrassment. I must have looked all sorts of desperate to throw myself at him like that. There was just something about him. Ugh, I had to get away before I stripped my clothes off and begged him to ravage me right there on the ice. "Over here, Mary, I'm here." I waddled out from the icy rock formation that was hiding me from her view and waved my arms in the air. Turned out I hadn't been hidden at all. Mary had been watching and was now wearing a shit-eating grin as she pulled the snowmobile up beside me and slowed the engine. She winked conspiratorially. "I could circle the ice a few more times if you want another go at him." My cheeks burned, and lacking any semblance of grace, I maneuvered myself onto the back of the snowmobile. I couldn't even meet Lodge Hottie's eyes. "Well, thanks again. Sorry for almost sucking your face off." I was appalled by what I'd just done. I slapped Mary's side. "Floor it." She hesitated only a split second, but long enough for the stranger to catch my attention one last time. He appeared as though he was about to reach for me. Then he said that word again. Mine. What was his?
I wanted to know what he meant, but Mary had already floored the accelerator. I flew backward and almost shot right off the tail end of the vehicle as we took off toward the bus. Chapter 8. Serge. Could I be more of a fucking idiot? No wonder she kept running. She probably thought I was a big, dumb blockhead with nothing but a one-word vocabulary. I marched across the ice back to the SUVs in a fit of embarrassment, confusion, and anger. Human. Not once in my life, not one fucking time, did I ever consider my mate would be fully human. Unfucking believable. Not that I was complaining about her. She was amazing, more than I could have hoped for. And that kiss. Fuck. I, however, continued to behave like a complete and total fucking moron. I knew how to talk to non-shifters. I liked non-shifters. My own mother was fully human, for God's sake. What I didn't know was how to claim a human mate. Up until a few hours ago, I hadn't even thought it was possible. I never knew my father. My mother, I loved, but often had difficulty relating to. Because of my parents, because my shifter father almost ruined my human mother when he left her for his true mate, I believed that humans and shifters shouldn't mix romantically since they could never be mates. I was wrong. "We're leaving." At my gruff announcement, Constantine, who had been staring down at the ice beneath him, looked up questioningly. Dmitri frowned and quickly scanned the area for signs of danger. "What's wrong?" I grabbed Pupkin by the collar of his jacket and started walking him backward toward the vehicles. Already miffed about the cell phone incident, Pumpkin's features contorted until he vaguely resembled a red, angry toad. "Wait just a minute, young man." I didn't have a minute. I had to get to my mate. I had no time to argue with him or anyone else. We came, we stopped, we saw. Time to move on. With my shifter eyesight, I was able to watch as my mate had slipped onto the tour bus just before it drove off. Based on the direction the bus took and the old itinerary from the receptionist at the lodge, I knew where the tour group was headed. And now that I'd found her and kissed her, I knew two more things with absolute certainty. 1, we were most definitely mates. And 2, no way would I let geography come between us. "Serge?" I tossed a dark look at Alexei. "Just go with it, I'll explain later." The men were loyal and trusted me, as their alpha, to make good decisions. Never would they have guessed that at the moment I was more concerned with chasing my mate than I was with the mission. It was so unlike me. Also unlike me was the fact that I felt not a twinge of guilt about it. I needed to tell the team, I knew that, but I wasn't sure exactly how or when. My brain was cycling through emotions of shock, bewilderment, and desperate longing. Building a career had been my top priority for so long now. In fact, it had been my only priority. I hadn't thought of anything else. I supposed that in the recesses of my mind, I'd harbored doubt that I'd ever actually meet my fated mate. No, it was more than that. Deep down, I hadn't thought there was anyone for me. I'd assumed that I'd never have a mate. And now, to find out that not only did I have one, a fantastic one, but that she was fully human was mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. The guys hurriedly loaded Pupkin into the SUV, probably thinking I'd discovered a threat and had merely chosen not to reveal my findings yet. Within minutes, we were heading toward a small nearby village, the most logical destination for a bus full of tourists. I knew of an inn nearby that I was fairly certain could accommodate Pupkin and the team. I drove the lead SUV with Dmitri and Maxim. Roman, Constantine, and Alexei were in the rear SUV with Pupkin. From the looks Dmitri and Maxim were giving me, it was clear I wasn't going to be able to get away much longer without offering up an explanation. I found my mate. My declaration was met with gaping expressions of astonishment. When we pulled into the lodge, I knew something was different. I just didn't know what. Then we ran into each other, literally. I still wasn't 100% sure until today. She's part of that tourist group. Maxim blew out a sharp whistle.
"You're serious?"
I growled. "Yeah, I fucking am."
"Well, where is she?"
I gestured with my chin. "Up there." By then, we'd almost caught up to the slow-moving bus. Dmitri leaned forward like he was going to see her through the back of the bus. "Why didn't she just ride with us?" My jaw clenched. She, ran from me." Maxim inhaled sharply.
"She rejected you? Dude, I'm sorry."
"Fuck you." I was 2 seconds away from reaching over and smashing Maxim's face in. "She didn't reject me." He nodded.
"Uh-huh. So running away is what exactly? Plain hard to get?"
"I'm done. We're not talking about this. We are not talking about this. I don't want your opinions and comments and advice. What would either of you know about it anyway?" Maxim let out a low chuckle.
"Ouch. I thought shifters are supposed to mellow a bit when they meet their mate."
Dmitri snorted. "Have you ever met a mated male? There's nothing mellow about them. Otherwise, normal, rational men turn into jealous, possessive, chest-beating Neanderthals, daring anyone else to even glance at their female." Maxim faked a gag.
"No fucking thanks."
"Both of you shut the hell up." "What's going on up there?" Roman's thoughts pushed into our heads. "You're speeding and swerving all over the place." Maxim laughed out loud.
"Serge has found his mate. Don't worry, though, he's perfectly sane and level-headed about the whole thing."
Alexei chimed in.
"You got a female up there?"
"Nope.
No, she ran away."
Maxim grinned at me. I glared back.
"But again, no worries, she has definitely not rejected him."
My growl was so loud it shook the SUV. "Okay, well, Pupkin is practically bawling like a baby back here." He latched onto the wild assumption that his enemies in the Bratva had come looking for him and that we're currently trying to outrun them. I groaned. "Tell him that we're not being followed, but we're taking a detour to throw any potential combatants off our tail." Dmitri slapped my shoulder before leaning back in his seat. "A mate, huh? I can't imagine." Maxim shuddered.
"Sounds like a prison sentence. I wouldn't want to imagine. I'm too young. I still have wild oats to sow and all that."
Dmitri snickered. "You've sown enough oats to rival Quaker." My bear was losing his shit. He couldn't handle that she'd run from us and I hadn't caught her. His one and only goal was to mount her and sink his teeth into her neck, claiming her. He wanted to show the world that she was ours. He was in total savage beast mode. I couldn't say that I was feeling much different. I'd never experienced anything as intense as the heady desire I felt for her. I tuned the guys out as I pulled up behind the bus, which had slowed to a crawl. I wasn't sure what to do next, play it by ear or formulate a plan. What I wanted to do was exactly what my bear was urging. March up to the damn thing, board it, toss her over my shoulder, and drag her away somewhere to claim her. Actually, the more I thought about it, the more sense the idea seemed to make. If I marked her with a claiming mark, this whole human/shifter dilemma would be moot. Probably. I wasn't completely sure since I didn't exactly know how human-shifter mating worked. What I did know was that I could take her into the woods at the edge of town and have her wearing my claiming mark in no time. When the bus finally pulled over, parking in front of a small hotel, our SUV was right behind it. The bus doors opened and people slowly began filing out with their luggage. All right, so this was the tour group's intended lodging. I knew they wouldn't stay long, probably just overnight, before reboarding the train and traveling to their next destination. If I was going to implement my hastily concocted plan, now was the time. I slid the SUV into drive, maneuvered around the bus, and skidded to a stop 2 blocks away in front of the inn that, I was relieved to discover, was still in operation. "Check Pumpkin in and get him settled. I gotta see about a thing." "Good luck," Dmitri chuckled. "With your thing." "I'll be back before too long."
"If she doesn't run from you again."
Maxim wiggled 2 fingers back and forth to mimic legs walking or running, then dodged my fist and got out laughing. Fuck these guys, they'd see. I watched as they practically dragged Pumpkin through the snow and into the large building that served as an inn. Shit. This was going to come back and bite me in the ass, I knew it. Of all times for something like this to happen, it had to happen when our careers were hanging by a thread. I always towed the line. Always. Sure, the other guys on the team were usually pulling some caper or other, some mischief, and bending the rules to varying degrees. While I reprimanded them, as was required by my job description, I didn't get too bent out of shape about it. It was who they were. They had too much energy, too much ability, and far too much bravado. I, however, never broke the rules, never strayed from protocol. Until now. I was quickly learning that the saying about never saying never was true. Of all times to deviate from my norm, this was the worst. Not just my career, but all our careers were on the line. By the time I'd returned to park behind the bus, it was empty. I sat in the SUV for a minute, debating my next course of action. It was difficult to think straight with my bear, my dick, and my mating instinct calling the shots, but I had just about convinced myself to storm the place and knock on every door until I found my mate's room when she came bursting out of the hotel. Her face was partially obscured by the oversized hood of her parka, but I knew it was her. A jolt of lust shot through me with such intensity, it felt like I'd just chewed a live wire. I was out of the vehicle and moving before I could second-guess myself. Sensing me, her head snapped in my direction. Those golden brown eyes widened, and her mouth fell open in surprise. When the scent of night-blooming jasmine and musk hit me hard, my bear released a possessive growl. Mine. Chapter 9. Hannah. The butterflies in my stomach had just started to settle somewhat from the kissing encounter when I realized I'd left my knit hat on the bus. With Hyacinth's promise to secure us a room, I ran outside hoping to catch the bus before it left. I'd no sooner burst through the hotel doors when I did a double take. Lodge hottie? What the? He was striding toward me quickly, that intense look still burning in his eyes. Oh, God. It was the look Paolo gave Mary. Passion and utter longing. Times 10. Times 20. This man wanted me. I should have been afraid. A tall, heavily muscled man practically charging me, but my body was doing stupid things. Stupid things. Instead of reacting in fear, my panties melted. I opened my mouth to say something, anything, but no sound came out. Probably because I was stunned stupid by Mr. Sexy and coming at me fast. Before I could get my brain to function enough to decide on an appropriate reaction, he was standing before me. Wow. Mine. Mate. Mine. He shook his head as though frustrated with himself. How sweet. I loved how he was trying so hard to communicate with me in my own language. I suppose that's all the English you know. Well, hello. I'm Hannah from Oklahoma. I tapped my chest. I'm sorry, I don't speak much Russian. I don't speak any Russian, actually, but I do have Google Translate. I waved my phone in front of him and got to work pulling up the app. I speak fluent English. His voice was a delicious baritone growl, and if my panties were wet before, they were drenched now. Come with me. Belly flutters. I took a mindless step in his direction before I realized the insanity of the situation. Had I lost all sense? Come with him? Bad idea. Well, I'd like to. That kiss was... I waved a hand in front of myself, fanning my face. Oh, God, it was unbelievable. And then you followed me. Stalked me. That was, either scary or romantic, I wasn't sure. He was so handsome and masculine and magnetic that all I could hear was Hyacinth telling me 100 times over to find a stranger and get myself laid, followed by Bryce's echoing voice calling me a boring, cold fish. Hannah 2.0, I reminded myself. But was it safe? I mean, I wanted to, I really did, but I didn't know. I retreated a step. I'm not sure it's such a good idea for me to come with you anywhere. Stranger danger and all that. Lodge Haughty's eyes narrowed. Without saying another word, he ducked slightly and tossed me over his shoulder like I was a sack of dog chow. Hey, what are you doing? You are mine, he said with a raspy growl to his voice that made my pulse race. When his hand rested on my backside, I once again cursed all the layers of my cold-weather clothing. You're my mate, and I'm taking you with me. I struggled. Not much, just a little. Excuse me, I think I need to know a little more than that, mister. I mean, I'm all about the me, Tarzan, you, Jane vibe you're projecting, but this is overkill. Where are we going? Where are you taking me? You're going to bring me back, right? Not until I claim you as mine. Claim me as... Okay, I stiffened. Wait, what? I fought harder. I don't even know your name. More wiggling. I could scream, you know. Oh, you'll scream, little mate. Scream in pleasure, scream in ecstasy, scream in rapture. His husky timbre sent heat coursing through my veins. His hand slapped my fiber-filled, padded ass cheek, and he growled again. What was with all the growling? I need to get you out of these clothes. Out of my clothes? Well, that's pretty presumptuous. Was it really, though, considering I was currently draped over his shoulder with his hand on my butt? I can smell your arousal. I know you want me as much as I want you. That shut me up momentarily. I blinked. You can smell me? You smell delicious, Hannah. He began walking. You have the most delicious fragrance I've ever had the pleasure of experiencing. My heart did a little somersault. At the sound of a car door opening, he slid me off his shoulder, and the next thing I knew, I was seated in the back of an SUV. Leaning over, Lodge Haughty stared into my eyes. I'm Serge. I'm yours. I had no clue what he meant by that. He was mine? In what way? But there were two things I did know for sure. One, those words spoken like that by a man like him were fire. Two, if he was a serial killer, letting him transport me to a secondary location probably meant I was dead meat. I knew that from binge-watching true crime shows. I didn't want to be dead meat, even if Serge held the promise of a good time first. I kicked my leg out in a defensive move, only to have him catch it and use it to tip me backward on the seat. Standing between my thighs, he looked down at me and grinned. From some strange place inside me, I growled, intent on giving him a taste of his own medicine. What do you think you're doing? Am I being kidnapped? He leaned closer, his hard length rubbing against me in a way that stole my breath. I could feel it right through the padded snow pants. Okay, that was definitely hot. His hand slid behind my head and pulled my face up to his for another one of his kisses. A kiss that sent a lava geyser gushing through my veins. If this was kidnapping, it wasn't so bad. I hadn't even realized I locked my arms around his neck until he pulled them apart so he could straighten to his full height. Stunned, I just watched as he swung my legs out of the way and closed the door. My brain was scrambled. Things like this didn't happen to girls like me. They happened to vivacious, outgoing, gorgeous supermodel types. All I could do was watch in astonishment as he rounded the outside of the vehicle and slid behind the wheel. He started the SUV and pointed the air vents at me before turning the heat on full blast. Warm air circulated quickly, penetrating my layers of clothing as he drove us a short distance to the outskirts of the small village and parked behind a cluster of frozen, snow-laden trees before turning to face me. "You're perspiring." I was. "You're not going to kill me, are you?" "Kill you?" He looked horrified. "I'm just asking, what is your intent here?" "I'm not going to kill you. I would never hurt you. I intend to taste, touch, and explore every part of your incredible body before I lay claim to you." OMG. Lay claim to me. He used such romantic phrasing. I should have listened to Hyacinth and had a hookup with a foreign stranger a long time ago. Although, if I was being honest, until Lodge Hottie, Serge, I hadn't really felt a desire for any man. In fact, I'd never desired anyone the way I wanted Serge, not even Bryce. I was really going to do this. I made a mental toast to new experiences, Russian hotties, and free love. That last one in honor of Hyacinth. Unzipping my jacket, I slid it off my arms. My hands shook as I did, an anxiousness building in me that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with delicious anticipation. There was something in me that felt as though it recognized him, like we'd met before, long ago. But that was impossible, and I knew we hadn't. His eyes moved over my body, the paler inner blue of his eyes darkening to match the outer ring. He licked his lips and ran his hands through his hair. "When I saw you at the lodge, I knew you were mine. I was surprised, afraid to believe it at first. Then I was angry at myself for letting you get away. Yet at the lake, I let you get away again." He got out and opened the back door. His large body filled the empty space of the back seat as he climbed in and shut the door behind him. He was suddenly right there, next to me. "I won't make that mistake again. This time, I'm not letting you out of my sight until I have claimed you." I felt the breath leave my lungs in a whoosh. "So, you did follow me, from the lodge and then from the lake to here?" "I did." He nodded and reached out to run a knuckle over the skin of my cheek. "Hannah, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." Well, we were even because he was, hands down, the most handsome man I'd ever seen. I sucked in a breath and shook my head. "This is crazy." "Not at all. This is fate." He unzipped his jacket and shrugged it off before reaching over his head, grabbing the back of his shirt and removing it with one pull. My mouth watered as I took in Serge's chiseled pecs and six-pack abs. Wow. He was even hotter without a shirt. Muscled, large, bare-chested, and right here with me. I twisted to face him more. "This is not something I do. In fact, I've never done this before." His eyes flew open wide. "You're a virgin?" "No, I meant I've never had sex with a complete stranger. Or in the back of an SUV in a quaint Siberian village. The only other man I've ever been with is my husband." An angry expression flashed across his features, making him look positively violent. "You're married?" I drew in a sharp breath. "Divorced." "Good, then I won't have to get rid of him." I laughed. He didn't. "My ex-husband was kind of a loser." "Clearly. If he no longer has you, he lost big time." Then Serge lunged. I let out a surprised squeak when his hands clasped my waist and he pulled me onto his lap so I was straddling him. "But his loss is my gain, and unlike the loser, I will never let you go." Okay, this might be going a little far for a random hookup with a foreign stranger. But what the hell? If he wanted to role play, create a fantasy, and make believe we were two people in love and what we had was forever, then I was down. It was a turn-on. Actually, everything about him was a turn-on, even the kidnapping fantasy. He took my hand, placing it on his bare chest over his heart. When I felt the pulsing of both our hearts, I gasped. They were beating in perfect sync. I hadn't known that was possible. Serge and I again locked gazes. The intensity in his eyes nearly brought me to tears. The corner of his mouth curled ever so slightly in a hint of a smile. We're fated, you and I. As crazy as it was, the fantasy he painted was magical, and I tumbled into it head over heels like Alice falling down the rabbit hole. Chapter 10. Hannah. The moment his lips descended on mine, my body melted into him. Bracing myself with my hands on his shoulders, I craved more. He was so delicious, I felt as though I couldn't get close enough. His teeth scraped my bottom lip, and my hips jerked in response. When he groaned, I did it again. I nipped his tongue as he explored my mouth, and his grip on my hips tightened. He pulled back enough to peel my sweater over my head, only to find another underneath. His growl of frustrated impatience made me grin. I removed that sweater. Under the second sweater was a long-sleeved thermal. He swore and pulled it off, followed by my t-shirt, then a tank top, before I was clad in only my bra. It was nothing special, something I picked up at a bargain store a few years ago. But the way he stared at me made me feel like it was sewn with gold thread and embellished with diamonds. He leaned in and placed a soft, tender kiss on my shoulder before sliding the strap down my arm. Is your lower half clad in as many layers? I smiled and shook my head. No. His mouth came back to mine with a teasing nibble that drove me mad while he slipped my other bra strap down my arm and unhooked the back. After the bra was gone, he continued to kiss me. His mouth devoured mine, his tongue plundered, his teeth nipped. He kissed me until my body trembled in his arms with need, and I rocked my hips against the large bulge in his pants, eager for more friction. Abruptly, he lifted me off his lap and placed me on the seat beside him. I had a half-second to feel bereft, missing his warmth, before he was there, hovering over me in the cramped space. His knuckles stroked down my stomach, then his fingers worked at my snow pants while his eyes roamed over my bare chest. In one swipe, my snow pants and thermal long johns were removed, and I could have sworn his eyes glowed as they raked slowly over my body. It was a little nerve-wracking, no lie. I'm not exactly firm and toned. I kind of let my gym membership lapse, or I would have let it lapse if I'd ever had one. He placed a kiss on my sternum, almost reverently. I would sacrifice everything for you, for this. Thanks? I stared up at him in total disbelief, but his eyes told me he wasn't joking. Wait, are you serious? I'm dead serious, Hannah. He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. Beautiful girl. Wars are fought over women like you. Titles seized, kingdoms vanquished. My breath caught. How can you say that? His thumb paused, and he moved his face closer to mine. How could I not? Look at you. There is nothing that I wouldn't do, that I wouldn't give up for you. I stared at him for several seconds before I regained the ability to speak. Wow, that's like the best compliment ever. Overcome with emotion, I pulled his face down to mine and kissed him. His hand stroked down my throat and over my chest, stopping to hold the weight of each breast before working down to cup my ass. I sucked in a breath when his mouth followed his hands, setting my skin ablaze. He took his time devouring me while he worked my panties down my legs. Then he maneuvered himself between my thighs, his canvas cargo pants pressing against my bare core. Undo my pants, little mate. His words emerged more growl than voice. and his eyes appeared to be glowing again as they met mine. I assumed it was a trick of the light. I just unbuttoned his waistband when his fingers stroked over my slick folds. I sucked in a sharp breath and lifted my hips as much as I could, seeking more. He rewarded me with lazy, gentle strokes over my sensitive clit. "Serge." He buried his nose in my hair and growled, "Say my name again." "Serge." I struggled to tug down his zipper, and when I finally got it, attempted to push his pants over his hips. He wasn't helping. He seemed content to just continue touching me. He ran his fingers through my wetness and then slid 2 digits into me. I moaned against the side of his neck and forgot about his pants for the moment. I tried to spread my legs farther apart to take in more of him as his long, thick fingers slid in deeper, but the back seat was too cramped. He scissored his fingers, stretching me, and used his thumb to circle my clit. I came embarrassingly fast. I could have made up 100 excuses. It had been forever for me. It was the thrill of experiencing a stranger or the risk of being caught. But it was none of those things. It was him. He seemed to know my body better than I did. Serge didn't stop. He worked another finger into my drenched core and nuzzled the tender spot behind my ear when the slight pain combined with the extreme pleasure to make me groan. "I'm not small, baby. I don't want to hurt you. I need to know you're ready for me." My body tightened as waves of pleasure overtook me, and I found myself chanting his name into his shoulder as another orgasm shuddered through me. My heart pounded against my chest, and I could feel the same rhythm throb around his fingers. Like he knew I needed a break, he removed his thumb from my overstimulated clit, but continued to stroke 2 fingers in and out of me, keeping in contact with my sensitive nerve endings. He sat up, watching his fingers penetrate me deeply, then withdraw, coated in my juices. "Fuck, you're beautiful." Overcome with a sudden rush of shyness for some reason, I tried to close my thighs, but he held them open. "I'm going to fuck you, beautiful Hannah. Tell me you want that. Tell me you want me to slide my cock into you and mark you as mine." His voice was thick and husky, and his eyes definitely glowed. "Say it." He'd given me 2 orgasms, and still I wanted more. I was greedy and needed to feel him inside me. Except, I do want that, but... I took a deep breath. "Do you have a condom?" "Please say yes, please say yes, please say yes." "Condom?" I nodded. "Yeah, prophylactic? A rubber?" He blinked, then ran a hand through his hair. "I don't have a condom, but My heart sank, but I had to do it. It was a hard limit for me. "Stop right there." I held a hand in front of his face. "It's one thing being tossed over your shoulder, then kidnapped, taken to a more secluded location and seduced, but I draw the line at risking my safety by going bareback." Although I was adamant, I was disappointed. This had all the promise of an encounter I would never, ever forget, even if it was in a fogged-up vehicle parked in a public area where we could be caught at any moment. And then I remembered something. Hang on. I reached down beneath the seat and rifled through my discarded garments for my parka. Sure enough, in the pocket was the string of condoms Hyacinth had given me on the bus this morning. At the time, I'd been mildly irritated with her. Now, I could kiss her. I waved them in the air between us. Serge didn't look pleased. Well, wasn't that just too damn bad? "Sorry, no glove, no love. It's a deal breaker. Wrap it before you tap it." He scratched his chin with his thumbnail. "We'll compromise. I'll wear a condom. You wear my claiming mark." Claiming mark? I wasn't exactly sure, but I supposed he meant he was going to remove the condom at the last minute and shoot his load on my stomach or breasts or something. Guys could be cavemen about things like that, and, I had to admit, my core clenched at the idea. It sounded daring and fun to me, and I was all into being Hannah 2.0 at the moment. Yes, please, I want your claiming mark. He let go of me and fought to get his pants off in the cramped back seat. Within seconds, he was seated, had the condom rolled over his thick length, and was dragging me onto his lap. With no effort, he held me by my hips, hovering over his rigid cock. You are mine. Swoon. When the head of his cock pushed into me, I was instantly grateful he took the time to stretch me enough to accommodate his girth. He was huge, and even with the preparation, I was stretched to the max. My fingers dug into his shoulders, and I took deep breaths, trying to relax as I sank down, allowing his length to penetrate me slowly, scraping every deliciously tingling nerve ending along the way. He lowered me inch by inch, his eyes glued to my face as though he was studying me and taking his cues from my reactions. Finally, our thighs met with a soft slap that had us both groaning aloud. He wrapped his arms around me and held me to his chest, his face buried in the crook of my neck. I felt his teeth there. I tossed my head back and gave him more of my throat. Please, Serge. He growled and lifted me before pulling me back down. He did it again, dragging me up and down his shaft as he scraped his teeth over my throat. Again and again, he lifted and lowered me, using my slick center to pump his cock. His teeth, lips, and tongue worked from my neck to my chest, my breasts, my nipples, and back to my neck as his thrusts gained momentum, growing faster and harder. As his fingers dug into my waist, his hips pistoned into me, stirring the familiar ache until I screamed with the wild orgasm that racked my body. It was nothing compared to what happened next, though. I was still flying high, my walls pulsing around him in spasms, when Serge's hips gave one last hard thrust, just as his teeth sank into my throat. The sharp sting lasted less than a second before a wave of euphoria, more potent than 50 orgasms, washed over me. My body screamed in white-hot pleasure, everywhere, over every inch of my anatomy. Delirious and struggling for breath, I collapsed against him, falling limp in his arms. Chapter 11. Serge. Time stilled as I cradled my precious mate against my chest. Her head was draped over my shoulder, her eyes were closed, and her breath was coming in shallow pants. Our mating had been more than I ever imagined. My cock was still inside her, and still hard, even though I just had the most powerful orgasm of my life. I hoped it would be without the condom next time, once I explained to her that, as a shifter, I carried no diseases myself and was immune to any human diseases. Of course, there was always the possibility of conception. I'd love to see her pregnant with my cub. First, I needed to explain the shifter part. We had forever to spend together, but this was important to get out of the way. The sooner, the better. My eyes fell to the gash at the crease between her neck and shoulder. My bear was pleased. Not only had she accepted our claiming mark, she'd begged for it. I stroked her hair and pressed a kiss to her forehead. Hannah was beyond compare. She stirred in my arms, her eyelids fluttering before slowly coming open. I watched as her beautiful golden brown eyes focused on mine, and a small smile lifted the corners of her mouth. I almost thought you were a dream. I flexed my hips and shook my head. This is for real, sweetheart. She groaned and her nails bit into my chest. Too sore. Placing a gentle kiss on her sweet lips, I helped her slide off my lap and onto the seat beside me. After removing the condom, I didn't quite know what to do with it, so I tied it off and shoved it in the pocket of my cargo pants, which were draped over the passenger seat. When Hannah trembled slightly, my arms went around her again, and I pulled her to my chest. "Are you okay, mate?" She nodded. "Yeah." Then she shook her head. "No, I don't know. It's suddenly hitting me what I just did." "What we did." I kissed her temple. "Okay, what we did." Her face held a huge grin. "It was spectacular. Better than spectacular. It was... I don't think there are words." "It's because we're mates. This only happens, this intensity, this heightened pleasure, this level of satiation, with true mates." "True mates. What do you mean by that?" "True, fated mates. It means we're meant to be together. Destined. You were made for me, I was made for you." Her back stiffened. "You honestly believe that?" "Of course. I'm a polar bear, so I've known about fated mates all my life. It's something we learn at a young age." It didn't dawn on me that her body had stiffened until she was pulling away from me. "What did you just say?" I hesitated and faked a light-hearted chuckle, but I was beginning to think I was in a heap of trouble here. "It's something I need to talk to you about." "You said polar bear?" I nodded, but before I could say more, Dimitri's voice pierced my thoughts. "Serge, we have a situation." Hannah was pulling away from me. She had crossed her legs, folded her arms over her chest, and angled her body toward the opposite door. I didn't like it. She was hiding herself from me, and I wanted to grab her and pull her close, but the look on her face told me that would be a bad idea. "When you say polar bear, you mean metaphorically, as in you thrive in a cold climate, right?" I snorted. "I do like cold weather, but when I say polar bear, I mean literally, not metaphorically." "Serge!" It was Alexei this time. "Red alert! We need you here!" I was certain the guys wouldn't interrupt for something frivolous. They knew who I was with and why. But the fear, regret, and revulsion on Hannah's face eclipsed all other concerns. Hannah's eyes were saucers as she began fumbling around for her clothing, hastily jerking arms and legs into the garments and skipping several of her previously worn layers altogether. "What are you doing? Why are you getting dressed?" "You're talking about being a furry, aren't you? The fandom thing?" "Furry?" "Serge." Roman this time. Fuck. Now that Pumpkin has access to a phone, he's threatening to call HQ. We have him temporarily, subdued, awaiting your instruction. I breathed a sigh. "Give me 20. I reached for Hannah, but she smacked my hand away. "Don't touch me. I should have known." She huffed a bitter laugh and shook her head at the ceiling. "I should have known. This was too good to be true. Meet a guy who finally makes me feel whole, and he claims he dresses up as an anthropomorphic animal. Probably attends conventions with other nutballs. I hate to kink shame, but you're either crazy or you're an asshole who's making this up to get me to leave in a hurry. Is that it? You got your rocks off, and now you're too chicken to tell me to hit the road, so you're pretending to be all freaky-deaky?" I was shocked. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I don't think we can hold him off any longer," came Roman's reply. "What am I talking about? I'm talking about not being into plushophilia. Not that I'm judging." She ran a hand through her hair. "Oh, who the hell am I kidding? I am judging, so sue me." "I don't really know what you're talking about. Not sure what plushophilia is, but it sounds like the type of disease I'm immune to, so no need to worry about that. And there are no conventions for my kind. I'm a shifter. And yes, I am quite furry when I shift from this human form." I gestured down the length of my body, into my polar bear form. "Shifter? No way. You mean shapeshifter? Like in the books? The fiction books?" "Hey, team leader, Eagle is flapping his feathers." Fucking Dimitri. "Just a goddamn minute." Fuck. I pulled a hand down my face to try to calm down, then noticed Hannah's expression. "Excuse me, I didn't mean to say that aloud. I wasn't talking to you." Will you assholes give me a minute? I'm dealing with a situation here." I turned back to Hannah, who now appeared even more repulsed. "I'm sorry, Hannah. I was talking to the guys." "What books?" "What guys?" She glanced around in horror. No, don't worry. They're not here. I was talking to them in my head." She blinked. "In your head? And you think you're a shapeshifter?" Hannah was wringing her hands and looking around nervously now. This was going downhill fast. "I don't think, I know. I am a shifter." I was beginning to see how this might look to someone previously unaware shifters existed. Not good. "You probably think I'm crazy." "Understatement," she said under her breath, but my shifter hearing caught it loud and clear. With the guys up my ass and Hannah jumping to conclusions, there was only one thing to do. Watch, just watch. I threw open the door and stepped out into the snow naked. Hannah shivered and slammed the door behind me. "Keep watching, sweetheart," I called over my shoulder. "I'll show you crazy." Stepping a few feet from the SUV, I took a couple of deep breaths to calm myself first. I needed to keep my anger in check. None of this was Hannah's fault. Of course she was suspicious. Who wouldn't be in her situation? Everything would be fine once she saw my impressive bear. I was mid-shift when I heard the locks engage. Once I had fully transformed, I glanced at Hannah to gauge her reaction, but she was no longer in the back. She'd hopped over into the driver's seat. It took only a split second to realize her intent, but it was a split second too long. Just as I tried to slam my body into the door to knock it open, the vehicle lurched forward. I had to leap back to avoid having my paws run over as the SUV took off and sped down the road at top speed. I chased the SUV for only a few yards before realizing it wouldn't do for the villagers to see me in polar bear form. They'd shoot to kill. I doubted I'd fare much better as a man running through the village naked. All I could do was release a string of curses as I watched the taillights fade. "Boss, what's happening?" Roman's concerned voice filled my head. "Meet me on the northern edge of town. Bring Eagle." I sighed in temporary defeat. "And clothes." Chapter 12. Hannah. My brain was doing a spot-on impression of the Tasmanian devil from those old Disney cartoons, thoughts swirling like a tornado. Serge, the guy I just had mind-blowing sex with. Mind-blowing was understating. And the guy I'd fallen into insta-lust with was not only a stalker, but also a nut job. Just my luck. And I stole his SUV. There really had been a polar bear, though. I saw it in the rearview mirror as I drove off. Serge had been there 1 minute, and the next, there'd been a massive polar bear. For a moment, I thought I'd have to go back and rescue him, but he was nowhere in sight, and there was no blood, so he must have made it to safety. Strange coincidence, though. Very strange. Maybe he was a magician, too. Or did they prefer to be called illusionists nowadays? I wasn't sure. All I knew was there was no way he'd actually changed into a polar bear, because that was impossible. It was. It was completely impossible. Wasn't it? I barked a laugh. "Hannah, now you're losing your marbles." I sank onto the bed in the cramped hotel room Hyacinth had booked for us and dropped my head in my hands. "I think I'm going crazy." She glanced up from the travel notebook she was writing in. "It's not a bad place to be. Trust me, I know. But where you should be is getting your groove on with a handsome Russian local instead of sitting in a drab hotel room with me. I told you to get yourself laid." I threw my arms wide open. Mission accomplished. "What? Oh, girl!" Hyacinth clapped her hands in front of her. "I'm proud of you." "Don't be. It didn't work out very well." She winced. "Premature ejaculator?" No, that part was... I sighed theatrically. It was afterward. Ah, a cuddler. I rolled my eyes. If only. He hears voices in his head, and he talks to them. She grimaced. I groaned. Well, it's not as though you were going to marry him or anything. How was the sex? Good. Understatement. It was earth-shattering. Heat flooded my veins, and I felt my core pulse, like my body was searching for him again. Just good? It was clear by her expression that she didn't believe me. She pointed a finger at me. You just turned 8 different shades of red. All right. It was the best sex of my life, bar none, which doesn't change a thing. Crazy is still crazy. I dug the heels of my hands into my eyes. Hyacinth, let me ask you something. I dropped my hands. She met my eyes and waited as I pondered how to phrase it. How common are polar bears around these parts? I mean, in civilized areas like villages and towns? She shook her head. Not very, although they're becoming more commonplace. Climate change is warming their normally frigid icy sea habitats, so the bears are forced to scavenge for food on land. The ones that are brave enough to venture into villages and towns are thin, scraggly, starving things. Not the one I saw. Don't worry, you won't see any around here. Well, I did. I wasn't hallucinating. I mean, the sex was out of this world, but even spectacular sex didn't cause hallucinations. I definitely saw a polar bear. So, tell me more about your hookup. He spoke to imaginary friends? Not only did he converse with voices in his head, he also claimed to be a polar bear. I screeched the words and then slapped my hands over my mouth and fell back on the bed, groaning. I waited for the hysterical laughter, but it never came. In fact, Hyacinth was quiet. Too quiet. Scowling, I propped myself up on my elbows. My traveling companion was staring wide-eyed, her jaw hanging. For the first time since I'd met her, she looked genuinely shocked. A polar bear? I sat up and worked my hands together. Yeah, he said he was a polar bear. He hears voices, talks to them too. Plus, I pulled the collar of my t-shirt down to show her the bite mark that was just now scabbing over. The blood drained from Hyacinth's face. Her voice dropped to a whisper. A claiming mark. My eyes widened in shock. That's exactly what he called it, a claiming mark. Oh, sweetheart. She crossed the tiny room, plopped onto the bed beside me, and threw her arms around me. What exactly did the shifter look like? Describe him. Shifter? You just called him a shifter. Of course. She pointed to the bite mark. You're mated to a polar bear shifter now. You know, I had this feeling. She paused, then flapped a hand in the air, waving away whatever it was she was going to say. Well, that's neither here nor there. Go on, describe him. Big. He was big and handsome, and his body was all muscles and hotness. Do you mean shapeshifter like in books? And why don't you look surprised or outraged or horrified or something? I could have been killed by a psycho stalker. Not with that claiming mark, you couldn't. The guy who gave you that would protect you with his life. And let me tell you, heaven help anyone intent on doing you harm. Those polar bears can be mighty vicious when it comes to protecting their mate. You're serious? Of course. You really believe all that crazy talk? Of course I do. Why don't you? I swallowed, feeling much of my earlier outrage drain from my limbs. Because there's no such thing as a polar bear shifter? Of course there is. Didn't you ask him to shift for you? No, but I think he did anyway. I just stole his SUV and took off. There was a moment of silence before she threw her head back and fell into a fit of belly laughing. When she finally calmed down, she wiped the tears from her eyes. "That's one of the funniest things I've ever heard," I groaned. "I stole it after he said he'd show me that he was a polar bear. He stepped outside, and I was terrified that he was going to murder me, so I got the hell out of there." I waited until she finished another round of hysterical laughter. "What do I do now?" "You don't need to do a damn thing." "Well, I feel like I need to find him and apologize." But really, this was so much to take in. I twisted a strand of hair around my finger nervously. "And return his SUV?" "Trust me, whoever gave you that mark on your neck will come looking for you." You lucky bitch. I fell backward on the bed again and stared at the ceiling. I hadn't expected to have sex with a stranger, but that I could accept. What was really throwing me off were all these mushy feelings I was having. Why did this one-time hookup with a hot foreign stranger feel like so much more? Well, duh, Hannah. Because of the intense looks, unbelievable chemistry, and the things he kept saying. You were the most beautiful woman he'd ever seen. He was laying claim to you, and your personal favorite. Wars were fought over women like you. I wasn't sure how to feel about any of it. Standing, Hyacinth stretched and rolled her shoulders. "Paolo and Mary are waiting." "For what? Where are you going?" "We are going to an indoor amusement park." My mind was buzzing. Nothing made sense. Men didn't change into animals. Wrong, Hannah. Apparently they did. Then there was the little incident where I'd stolen his vehicle and left him stranded. I wasn't so sure I could come back from that. Maybe I need to find him and apologize. "Don't worry, I told you, he'll find you." She slid an arm into her parka. "Oh, one more thing. When you do see him, which I have no doubt will be very soon, make sure to get an in-depth explanation of that claiming mark on your neck." Chapter 13. Serge. A fucking amusement park. Pupkin's sourpuss expression reflected what he thought of both me and my opinion. "If I were you, I wouldn't complain, polar bear. You're skating on thin ice as it is. Once I speak to the director regarding my treatment." He swiped his finger across his neck, a gesture implying heads would roll. More specifically, my head. And he wasn't wrong. I just hoped the organization wouldn't penalize the rest of the team for my actions. Regardless, my first priority was my mate. I was completely preoccupied with thoughts of her and wondering what my next course of action should be. Maxim glanced at me sympathetically and shrugged. "It's the largest amusement park in all of Russia." "But Smurftown?" I glared at the little blue creatures running around as we passed a mushroom-shaped cottage labeled Smurfette's house on our way to Gargamel's tower. "Isn't this for the kiddie crowd?" "If you behave yourself, maybe we can visit Hello Kitty's beauty salon next." Alexei fluffed his hair and fluttered his eyelashes theatrically. I didn't give a shit about Pumpkin anymore. The only reason I allowed our excursion to the amusement park was that it was one of the scheduled stops printed on the old travel brochure, which meant that, unless the itinerary had changed, my mate just might show up here. We'd been tailing Pumpkin for an hour or so as he enjoyed the sounds of screaming children, whirring rides, and carnival music when I got a whiff of night-blooming jasmine and musk. My mate was nearby. I took a deep breath, then turned to Roman. "I don't care what you do with the prick, I need to find Hannah." I stormed away in the direction of Hannah's scent, my nose tilted in the air. My entire body was on edge, my skin suddenly too taut for my frame. My bear clawed to be released, wanting me to shift. He couldn't believe I'd let her get away in the first place. I couldn't believe she'd wanted to get away. The guy suggested that I may have moved too fast, come on too strong, and scared her off, but none of them were mated, so what did they know? Furthermore, they'd never heard of a shifter with a human mate either. Their advice on how to navigate the situation was a guessing game, as was my own. I knew Hannah had been right there with me, feeling the connection, experiencing the mate bond, but I didn't know if she felt it as overpoweringly as I did. I was having a hard time staying on the trail of her scent. I caught snippets, but the park was filled with a multitude of scents, so when I finally spotted her, standing at the base of a large Ferris wheel, staring up at the lights, I almost plowed over a family of 4 to get to her. Even though the entire park was enclosed in a massive domed structure, this part of the park was darkened to simulate a star-filled evening. The twinkling lights cast a glow over her dark blonde curls. She turned, spotting me as I approached. Her lips parted and her eyes widened. I couldn't keep my gaze from raking longingly over her curves. My mate. Absolutely without a doubt, mine. My mouth watered. "I've been looking all over the park for you." As I stared down at her, I fought the urge to lean down and taste her lips. I owe you an apology. You know, for running off, and for stealing your vehicle, and leaving you out in the cold." She smiled coyly. "Naked? So, sorry." My fingers twitched and I reached out, wanting to feel her. As though in a trance, she lifted her hand to meet mine. As our fingertips touched, a charge ran through us, like an electrical current connecting us. "You two getting on?" I pulled back and glanced over Hannah's head at the young guy waiting for us. The ride attendant motioned toward the open gondola at the base of the large wheel. I looked down at Hannah and a smile formed on my lips. "Tell you what, you can make it up to me." I gestured to the Ferris wheel with my chin. She eyed the ride cautiously. I got the impression it made her slightly uneasy, but I needed to get her somewhere to talk, someplace she couldn't get up and run off again. The corners of her lips turned up in a faint smile. She nodded in agreement, and I quickly ushered her into the gondola before she changed her mind. She climbed up and sat in the far corner. I got in next to her, and the attendant secured a half door at the side of the hanging cabin. When the giant wheel moved a few feet, I grinned at the way her hands balled into white-knuckled fists. She took a deep breath before she spoke. "You scared me earlier. That was why I ran." "I never meant to. I guess I got ahead of myself. I should have told you about my bear in a different way, Hannah."
"Well, to be fair, I'm not sure you could have told me in a way that wouldn't have made me run for the hills. That polar bear thing is a lot to process."
I stretched my arm out behind her and stroked my fingers down her shoulder and upper arm. There are a lot of people like me, shifters, I mean. In fact, I work with a close-knit team of polar bear shifters. Her eyes scanned my clothing. "Are you a soldier or something?" "I work for a branch of the shifter government. It's like your military special forces. We're an Arctic Rescue League."
"Wow, that's impressive. Like the Navy SEALs?"
I grinned. "Somewhat, except we can shift into polar bears." She angled herself to face me more.
"What's it like, shifting?"
"It's like changing into your favorite shirt. My bear is my other half. He's just as much me as who you're looking at right now."
"Right."
She appeared skeptical, and I reminded myself it must be hard for her to fathom.
"Are you still aware of things when you're a bear?"
"Yes, even more aware in some ways. I can smell better, see better, and hear things from miles away, but I'm still me." When the wheel turned again, Hannah shivered and she let out a breathy little gasp. Our gondola climbed higher, then swung back and forth slowly. Her hand clasped my thigh, and she pressed herself against my side. Attempting to put her at ease, I started off our conversation by asking benign questions. "Do you have family in Oklahoma?" Her head snapped up.
"How did you know I was from Oklahoma?"
"You told me when you introduced yourself. You said, 'I'm Hannah, I'm from Oklahoma.'" She released a shy laugh.
"Oh, just my Nana. She raised me. My parents dumped me off with her when I was young, then they died a few years later in a boating accident."
As the ride loaded passengers and our gondola slowly crept nearer the top, Hannah stiffened and looked around, slightly panicked. I pulled her onto my lap, wrapping my arms around her tightly. At my iron hold, the tension that had been mounting in her muscles was dispelled, and she relaxed against me.
"What about you? I mean, what's it like being in a shapeshifter family?"
My lips brushed her forehead before I answered. I didn't grow up in a shifter family. My mother is fully human, and my shifter father took off before I was born. I hated talking about this kind of shit, but if it would make Hannah more comfortable and keep her from running, I'd gladly bare my soul. She was my mate, after all. She deserved to know everything there was to know about me. I always felt as though I had to work twice as hard to prove myself since I had no father around to set an example. Not to mention the fact that my mother is of a different sort, even for a human. I noticed Hannah's questioning frown. Ma has a good heart and always had the best intentions. She even raised me in Siberia rather than her native country to ensure I'd be around other polar bear shifters. Her golden brown eyes were locked on mine as I spoke, and I ran my thumb down her cheek. When her lips parted slightly in response, my lungs constricted. "So, tell me more about your Nana." The question seemed to sadden her, and I wished I hadn't asked. I was just trying to follow the advice the guys gave and take things more slowly this time.
"She has dementia and lives in an assisted living facility."
"You put her in an old folks' home?" It popped out before I had time to censor myself. She stiffened, and I wanted to kick my own ass for not keeping my big mouth shut.
"No, I didn't. About 5 years ago, just after she was diagnosed, she informed me she was moving into the facility and had made all the arrangements. I begged her to stay and let me care for her, but she refused."
Hannah looked down at her hands.
"That was around the time I got married. Looking back, I think I just didn't want to be alone. I found out later he'd started cheating when we were dating and probably only married me to get his hands on the small trust fund my parents left me."
A low growl rumbled from my chest.
"That's not the worst part. The worst part is he left me."
She gave a brittle chuckle.
"I would have stayed, even after I found out."
"The fucker better pray I never meet him face to face, because only one of us will leave that meeting still wearing a face." There I went again, blurting out shit before I had a chance to think about what the hell I was saying to her. I held my breath, awaiting her reaction. Hannah fidgeted in my arms, then her hand reached around to clasp the back of my neck. My cock hardened instantly to granite. I know she felt it poking her ass cheek. Her gaze met mine, and she licked her lips.
"You make me feel so important and special."
"You are special." She sighed and laid her head against my chest. "Hannah, I know your heart has been bruised and battered. It needs time to heal. It needs to feel safe and loved. It's probably a process."
"Exactly. I'm a mess, in no shape for a healthy relationship. You should probably find someone else. I think you picked the wrong woman."
"I told you, we're fated." Chapter 14. Hannah.
"We're fated." I stared up at the faux night sky. We were near the top of the Ferris wheel, but the ride hadn't started its full run yet. The operator at the bottom was still loading the final gondola.
My pulse was racing, and my body was having a strong reaction to everything Serge said and did, but my mind was reeling. Fear and dread snaked a cold trail up my spine at the very idea of whatever it was between us. Serge's eyes flicked down to my lips. He was going to kiss me, and I wanted his kiss. But the feelings bubbling to the surface and threatening to break through were dangerous. They screamed passion, red-hot lust, sweaty, breathless sex. But what happened when he found out I wasn't that kind of girl? That what we did in the SUV earlier, the mind-blowing sex, was a one-time freakish thing that most probably would never be recreated. Then what? He would eventually realize I didn't inspire that type of passion. I was plain, boring, lame. A cold fish, according to Bryce. What would happen then? I didn't even need to ask the question. It wasn't my first rodeo, so to speak. I'd grow attached to him, rely on him, maybe even love him. I glanced up at his handsome face. Yes, I would most certainly fall in love with him. Then, he'd leave. We're fated. That was his answer. Simple, naive. I knew the truth, though. I'd experienced it with every other person I'd cared about in my life. Bryce, my parents, who'd left me behind long before they'd lost their own lives. Even Nana had left. If I let my guard down, I would come to rely on Serge only to wind up rejected and abandoned again. Alone. You're upset. I considered denying it, but why bother? Yeah, I am. Then I remembered something Hyacinth had said. Make sure to get an in-depth explanation of that claiming mark. This. I rubbed the still tender gash on my neck. I'd never been into biting or that kind of thing during sex, but I couldn't deny it had felt spectacular. My claiming mark? Yeah, claiming mark. I rolled the words over my tongue, tasting them. What? I mean, why'd you bite me? That mark there, it tells everyone you're mine. Yours. My heart fluttered wildly. For how long? Oops, I hadn't meant to ask that out loud. Forever. My cheeks heated. Forever. Shifters mate for life. He ran his thumb over the mark and growled. It's like how humans marry, only we don't divorce. Yeah, right. You don't know me well enough to say that yet, buddy. The Ferris wheel was making full revolutions now. Half of me wanted to lean forward, grasp Serge by the shoulders, and plant a searing kiss on those stern, serious, sexy as heck lips. The other half, the more forceful half, wanted to leave him before he left me. This is just no good. The scowl lines on his forehead deepened. No good? Why? Because... I threw my hands in the air dramatically. This whole shifter marriage thing. You just up and claimed me, that's why. Without my permission. How dare you? And stop saying you're mine to me. I'm a person. I don't belong to anyone but myself. Got it? He seemed to ponder this a moment, then cocked a brow mockingly. Fine. I'm yours. Better? Someone screamed in the gondola below us, the happy shriek of a child. There I was, sitting with a perfect stranger who told me we were married. I studied him. His face held not even a hint of insincerity. Being next to Serge was intoxicating. It was all the passion I'd been missing in life. It couldn't last long, though. The ache in my chest grew. I was torn, but I couldn't go through it again. I maneuvered off Serge's lap to sit beside him on the bench seat. Hannah? I looked up at Serge and watched as he rubbed his chest. I realized I'd been doing the same thing and forced my hand down to my lap. I can sense you panicking. You shouldn't have done this. You can't just decide things for people. You don't get to decide that for me. Hannah, I didn't decide. Fate did. Great, so it wasn't even that you wanted me, it's just what fate chose. Of course I wanted you. I want you. He swore under his breath and raked a hand through his hair. What I mean is, I wasn't exactly looking for a mate. I'm busy, my job is my life. In fact, I'm supposed to be working right now. I may not have decided this, but fate intervened and I'm not sorry about it. Oh, well, excuse me, why don't you get back to your busy life? I crossed my arms over my chest and shook my head, aware I was acting like a psycho chick. Panic made a person do strange things. I don't think I'm saying any of this right. He repositioned himself, making the gondola swing back and forth, then swore when I jolted and grabbed the side of the gondola. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again, then released a sigh. Why are you angry with me? I'm angry because I want this so badly that when you find out that I no longer excite you, that I'm a boring, bland, cold fish and you leave me, I will be destroyed. Because you took away my choice. Neither of us had a choice. I suddenly felt tears well up in my eyes and a lump formed at the back of my throat. Not wanting Serge to witness my rush of emotions, I turned away. Damn it, Hannah, don't cry. He wrapped his arms around me and pulled me against him. I'm sorry, baby. I didn't mean to upset you. Please, don't cry, mate. Don't call me mate. My God, I was a basket case. My therapist would have a field day with this conversation. I swiped at the tears leaking from my eyes and shook my head. Let's just act like this claiming Mark never happened, okay? I'll go back home to... Nothing. I'd go back home to nothing but emptiness. A hollow feeling in my chest. But wasn't that hollow feeling so much better than abandonment and betrayal? I'd do anything, sacrifice anything to avoid feeling abandoned again. No. His voice had taken on a gravelly edge. Not okay. The panic was wrapping around my chest, squeezing like a boa constrictor. I needed to escape this. So what? In another week or so, I go back to the U.S., then what? You live here, and my home is in the States. I mean, a long-distance relationship is hard enough, but living on the opposite sides of the globe? Impossible. We're not going to be long-distance. I need to be near you. He nuzzled his face into my neck and sighed. I don't want to fight. So, you think I'm just gonna leave my entire life and move here? What life, Hannah? You have nothing to go back to, except a Nana who doesn't know who you are most of the time. Yes, or I'll go with you back to Oklahoma. Huh? You mean you leave your job, your team? For me? We're a team, you and me. The team I value most. Of course I'd give up my job if that's what I have to do to keep you, in a heartbeat. I took a deep breath and thought about screaming. Instead, I bit my tongue and decided that I didn't care what he said. We were getting a shifter divorce. Serge held me while the Ferris wheel made intermittent stops, unloading riders now. His breath on my neck was teasing, but I was in such a fearful and agitated state that all I could think about was running away from him as fast as I could. When it was finally our turn to get off, I tried to duck through the crowd and get lost, but Serge's hand settled at the base of my neck and held tight. He lowered his mouth to my ear and growled. One thing you're going to realize is that I'm never letting you go. That itch to run. Drop it, Hannah, because it's not happening. You're not getting away from me. I elbowed him in the ribs and winced when it hurt me. He was fine. My elbow smarted. "Let me go." "Never." "Let me go, Serge, or I'm going to scream." He turned me around so he could bend down and get eye to eye with me. "Scream. Try to run. I don't care. You are the only woman in the world meant for me, and I'm not letting you go. You're mine, Hannah. We'll work through whatever's holding you back." I reacted without thinking, bringing my knee up hard and slamming it into his crotch. He buckled over, letting go of me as his hands flew to cup his balls. I didn't hesitate. I ran. I would not be caught in a vulnerable position again. Anger was easier than fear and uncertainty. Even as I ran through the park looking for the exit, I had doubts and second thoughts. Why was I running away from him? Still, I didn't slow. I had no desire to sit on the tour bus for the next several hours until it was scheduled to head back to the village. Instead, I found a taxi stand and, with a little help from the Google Translate app, headed to the hotel before Serge could catch up to me. If he would even attempt to catch up to me. Chapter 15. Hannah. I felt bad for ditching Hyacinth at the amusement park. Kind of. Not really. Hyacinth wasn't the type of person who normally minded being on her own. And if she did, I had no doubt that she'd find someone to keep her company. Someone of the male persuasion, most likely. Curled into a ball on my bed, with the blanket pulled over my head, I rolled over to bury my face in the pillow. I knew I was being an unreasonable bitch. I knew it. I knew I was allowing my failed relationship with Bryce to ruin any future I might have with Serge. I'd seen enough shrinks throughout the years that I was able to self-analyze some of my crazy, especially regarding something so obvious. It was not only the similarities between my marriage to Bryce and this thing with Serge that created such a petrifying fear, but the differences as well. Bryce's betrayal had stung like 100 little needles, like being attacked by a swarm of bees. Yet, I'd never, not even in the beginning of our relationship when everything was new and fresh and untainted, had feelings for Bryce like the all-consuming desire I felt for Serge. A betrayal and subsequent abandonment from Serge wouldn't feel like a swarm of bees, unless the bees had stingers as big as bayonets that could slice clean through my flesh. Bryce had never looked at me the way Serge looked at me, or said the things Serge said to me. Wars are fought over women like you. Serge meant it too. I knew it with every fiber of my being. My heart begged to go back to him, be brave, make it work. My head, on the other hand, she was a stubborn, tenacious bitch. Sure, he'd essentially married me without my permission. Sure, everything I knew about life had just changed. Men turning into polar bears was a thing. But when he touched me, my whole world lit up. All those hollow places inside shrank, and I no longer felt empty. He made me feel as though I didn't need to continue my quest for that elusive thing that was missing from my life. Serge was what I'd been looking for, my missing piece. How utterly petrifying. The sound of the door swinging open tore me from my musing. I sat up and fought to get the blanket off my head. A rosy-cheeked Hyacinth stood in the doorway. "And there she is." Hyacinth plopped herself on the foot of my bed. "Heard you left early. What happened? I was really expecting to see you and your polar mate to be together." He was there, at the park." "Then why are you here all by your lonesome?" My stomach tightened. "It's a long story, but to paraphrase, I kneed him in the balls and ran away. I needed some space." She shook her head and actually looked disappointed in me. That was new. Hyacinth doled out advice on the regular, but she rarely judged. I didn't like the way her disappointment made me feel, but frankly, I was disappointed in myself. That had been a low blow on my part. No pun intended. I know it was stupid and wrong, but I'm so scared that I'll open myself to him and end up betrayed and abandoned again, just like with Bryce. She was shaking her head emphatically. You're just being a coward. That doesn't happen. Mating is for life. That's how it is with shifters. Once they find their mate, there is no one else for them. Ever. She looked sad for a moment. It was only a split second, but I clearly saw a wave of melancholy cross her features before she was once again her bold, snarky, outgoing self. I wanted to ask her how she knew all this, but Hyacinth knew a lot about all kinds of obscure things. She'd spent decades traveling the globe and had lived on almost every continent. Besides, I knew she was right. I was being a chicken. Hannah 2.0 flew out the window, and Hannah chicken shit replaced her. Life is too short, Hannah. She watched me silently for another minute, then slapped both palms on her thighs. And speaking of short, I have a hot date tonight. My brows rose. All right, it's a booty call. Not quite sure about this one. He kind of resembles a toad, but if he can eat pussy, who cares, am I right? Ew, TMI. I stuck the tips of my index fingers in my ears. What? You don't get to act all straight-laced and prudish anymore. I huffed a humorless laugh in response. I'm going to meet him as soon as I know you're okay. Where? The inn on the corner. It's just down the block. I shook my head. Wait a second, Hyacinth. Isn't that dangerous? First of all, I have a great sixth sense when it comes to people, especially men. I've honed it through years of practice. Second, he's a public figure, some sort of politician, and travels with security. They'll be standing guard. What's he doing around here? I don't know. Maybe I'll ask. She stood up and adjusted her boobs. If we have any time for conversing, that is. Between you and me, I hope we don't. If I'm lucky, the little toad is hung like a horse and wants to plow me 6 ways to Sunday. I pulled my blanket back over my head and faked a gag. If he does, feel free to keep it to yourself. Well, I'll leave you with some parting words of wisdom. I may not know much, but I do know that you won't find that missing piece by playing it safe and close to the vest, no matter how far or how long you travel. You gotta take risks. Succeed or fail. Either way, you win, because you learn something about yourself in the process. Girl, test your mettle. I know you well enough already to know you got it in spades. I considered throwing a pillow at her, but by the time I sat up, she was already on the other side of the door. She'd given me food for thought. I stood up. I'd traveled across oceans to find something that made me feel alive and complete. Instead of something, I found someone. What I felt for Serge was nuts, but my entire body came alive for him. Because of him, the world was more vivid. Colors were brighter, smells sweeter. I sat back down. But he'd taken my freedom of choice from me. He'd just given me this claiming mark, supposedly for life, without me having any say in it. I stood up again. Did it really matter, though, if at the end of the day he was the one I was meant to be with? If we were fated to be with one another, what difference did it make in the long run how it happened? I sat back down. There was still so much I didn't know about him. Like his favorites, color, food, book, pastime, hobby, etc. I stood up. I needed to see him. We needed to talk more. Hurrying out of my room, I decided to find Serge before I had time to rethink and talk myself out of it. As I locked the door behind me, it dawned on me that it might be difficult to find him when all I knew was his first name. I was wondering if there might be anything in the SUV I'd stolen that would give me a clue as to where I could find him when a hand clamped over my mouth. Then I was yanked backward into a shadowed alcove. In the pit of my stomach, I knew this was not going to end well. I struggled, kicked, and fought for all I was worth. Surprisingly, the arms that held me let go, and I stumbled forward. I had only a brief moment to bask in my victory before I felt a sharp crack at the base of my skull, and everything went dark. Chapter 16. Serge. One good kick with the sole of my combat boot, and the hotel room door flew open so hard it made a dent in the wall. Despite the vow I made to myself to have patience with my mate, to give her time, space, and anything else she needed, I'd followed her scent trail back here to her hotel and then up to this room. I was probably deluded, I knew that, but if I could just talk to her, explain things better, I thought I could get her to understand how much I wanted her, that this wasn't all about fate. As I'd approached, the pungent stink of fear hung in the air, all along the hallway, and mingled with Hannah's natural jasmine scent. I had no choice but to break down the door when she didn't answer my knock. I had a suspicion that maybe she was avoiding me. But maybe not. The room was small with 2 twin beds, a tiny writing desk, and a folding chair. And it was empty. Son of a bitch. Hannah's musky jasmine aroma was strong in the room, but there was another scent, one that was familiar. But everything was overpowered by Hannah's scent. Tingles of trepidation crept over my skin. It was that scent of fear in the hallway, like rotting vegetation, that unsettled me. I searched the area surrounding the hotel. Nothing. How had she slipped away? Where had she gone? The SUV she'd stolen was parked behind the hotel, but she still had the keys. I could have hotwired it, but I was in enough trouble. I decided instead to head back to the inn for our other SUV. Unfortunately, I had to go up to the room to get the keys, but I was determined not to take any shit from the guys. If they thought they could stop me, just let them try. I'd never felt so on edge. I knew I needed to breathe and calm down before I lost my mind, but my bear had other ideas. He wanted me to go looking for our mate, to find her, make sure she was safe. He needed an explanation, and so did I, about why her scent vanished into thin air. Dmitri and Constantine stood in the hallway outside our rooms. They appeared to be standing guard. When Dmitri saw me, he looked confused. "What are you doing back? I thought you went." I ignored him. By this point, my trepidation had escalated tenfold, and I was in a state of extreme agitation. All I cared about were the car keys and finding my mate. "Serge, don't go in there. Pumpkins with..." Ignoring Dmitri, I pushed past him and rammed the door open with my shoulder. 'Cause fuck doorknobs. I came to an abrupt halt as my brain attempted to process what I saw. Pupkin was on his knees, between the naked thighs of oh no. Oh Lord, kill me now. Quick, somebody blind me with a red-hot poker or a lobotomy. I'll settle for a lobotomy. My voice startled the woman on the bed, who propped herself up on her elbows as I slapped a palm over my eyes. "Why, hello, Sergey." Fuck my life. Sergey? Dimitri's brow shot up to his hairline. There was a rustle of bedsheets and clothing, and I released an exasperated sigh, keeping my hand clamped firmly over my eyes. "Hello, Mother." "Mother?" Both Khan and Dmitri gasped. "You can look now, son. I'm decent." "That's debatable." I dropped my hand. "Watch your mouth. You may be grown, but I'm still your mother, and don't act as though you're being tortured." "Tortured? I would rather have been waterboarded than see that." Pupkin was sputtering, his face red, wet, and still toad-like. "You! What are you doing here? I demanded privacy." "That's my mother, you were... I threw my hands up. Forget it. Just forget it. Jesus, I just want to forget it. Aghast, Pumpkin turned to my mother. Hyacinth, is it true? Before she had a chance to answer, Roman, Alexei, and Maxim appeared at the top of the stairs, their arms laden with bags of takeout food. Alexei handed a bag to Khan and one to Dmitri. Hey, boss man, thought you went to make nicey-nicey with your mate Hannah after you scared her off earlier. Hannah? My mom's fingers froze in the middle of buttoning her blouse. Wait a minute. You're the polar bear shifter that gave Hannah that claiming mark? You're Hannah's mate? She clapped a hand to her heart like she was overcome with emotion. Oh, Serge! How the hell did Ma know Hannah? And then it hit me why the other scent in the hotel room was so familiar. It belonged to my own mother. I'm trying to find her. She was angry with me and she vanished. My mother waved a hand in the air. She's in our hotel room, number 12. No, Ma, she's not in the room. I was just there. I was with her not 20 minutes ago. Ma shrugged her coat on. I'm going to see. Wait, are you coming back? Hyacinth, my dear, come back. Pumpkin's shouts went unanswered as my mother, Roman, Alexei, Maxim, and I raced down the steps and out on the road. Ma was in the lead. You searched the lobby, Serge? I looked everywhere. Her scent just vanished. We followed my mother into the hotel and down the hall to number 12. Ma reached in her knapsack, but before she had a chance to pull out a key, the door creaked open on its hinges. Cutting her eyes to me, Ma shook her head. I shrugged. She turned to Maxim and Alexei. He was like this as a boy, too, always breaking things. Didn't know his own strength, my son. Ma, please, it's not the time. My hands were balled tightly as I once again faced the empty room. My mother stepped inside and sat on the edge of a bed, digging around in her knapsack until she pulled out a phone. After tapping at the screen, she brought it up to her ear. I'm just going to call. We all stopped cold as ringing sounded from Hannah's bed. I walked over, ruffled the blankets, and grabbed Hannah's ringing cell phone, my heart lodging itself in my throat. Would she have left her phone? My mother's face had grown pale. She looked as though she might be sick. Not if she was going out. Serge, what if something happened to her? I'll find her. I promise I'll find her. Serge, Hannah is special. I know, Mom. I'm just saying, she's been through a lot the past year. I expect you to treat her. Ma, she's my mate. My mother nodded. I knew she was nervous, but before I could further reassure her, Dmitri projected his thoughts telepathically to all of us. Serge, red alert. The Bratva just contacted Pumpkin's phone. They have Hannah. My mate. They had my mate. My bear reared to the surface, and before I could stop it, a thunderous, ear-splitting roar emerged from my lungs so loud it shook the entire building. They were all going to die. Chapter 17. Hannah. I was spitting mad. There was kidnapping, and then there was kidnapping. It was one thing to be manhandled by your mate, tossed over a shoulder, and whisked off to be treated to multiple orgasms, but another thing entirely to be knocked out by a blow to the head with a blunt object and then wake up to find yourself chained to a toilet. Well, locked in a bathroom and chained next to a toilet. Which was a big difference, actually, since I needed to relieve myself and the chain was too short for me to reach the toilet bowl. By about 4 inches. I had no idea what this whole abduction was about. I heard a lot of talk come in from the other room and guessed there were at least 3, maybe 4 guys out there, but I couldn't understand a word of their Russian conversation. I may have been going out on a limb, but I was clinging to the hope that this was a case of mistaken identity. I just kept picturing how embarrassed my captors were going to be once they found out they'd kidnapped the wrong woman and chained her up in a dirty bathroom. Disgusting. I was surprisingly calm. If this had happened a day or more ago, I would have been in complete freak-out mode. Not today, abductors. Today, I had a mate who would come for me. He may be pissed that I had a panicked moment, kneed him in the nuts, and ran from him. Again. But he would come for me. This I knew. I didn't know how, but I knew it to the depths of my soul. I was going to have one hell of a travel story when I got out of here. I'd finally have one to rival Hyacinth's. I was pretty sure they drugged me, because on top of the headache from the crack to my skull, I felt slow and sluggish. Whatever they gave me seemed to still be in my system because I wasn't completely coherent. My thoughts were erratic, and I really had to relieve myself. Hey? Hello? No response. Hey, you Russian dudes, I need to pee. I tried to think of Russian names, hoping I'd get one of them to respond. Boris? No answer. Yuri? Nothing. Mikhail? Rasputin? Still nothing. I crossed my legs and wiggled, trying to hold it. The last thing I wanted to do was have an accident. I didn't care if the Russian kidnappers found me doused in urine when they checked on me. Well, besides the discomfort of soiled clothes and a potential rash situation, but Serge was coming. I didn't want him to see me like that. That would be mortifying. I tugged at the chain that bound my cuffed hands to the drain pipe under the sink. It didn't budge. When I got out of here, I was going to start lifting weights, or at least think about a gym membership. Anyone out there? I need to pee. I can't reach the toilet. Yoo-hoo! The solid door opened slowly with a loud groan of metal on metal, and a large, beefy man with a squished face glared at me. Stop shouting. He had a thick Russian accent. Let me use the toilet, then. I glared right back at him. This is cruel and unusual punishment. I need to pee and I can't reach. Unchain me. Shut the hell up, or I will crack your head open on that commode. Do you hear me? I huffed in outrage. What is wrong with you? I just need to urinate and there's a toilet right there. I don't even think you realize you've got the wrong lady, pal. Squishy Face was jostled by a small man who nudged him aside to squeeze through the doorway and enter the bathroom. The smaller man's face wasn't squished, but his nose was severely crooked, like it'd been broken several times and never properly set. He approached and squatted in front of me, pinching my chin firmly between his fingers. Holding my face steady, he raked his beady eyes over me. Not the wrong one. You're the bitch who mated the leader of the polar bears, and you're the bitch who is our ticket to Pumpkin. My stomach sank. What polar bears? He squeezed my chin tighter. Do not try to be, how you Americans say, fucking cute. Your mate will come running soon, and when he does, he will deliver Pumpkin, or you will die. Painfully. Oh, crap. That was why he wanted me. I was bait, and he hoped to exchange me for someone else. Like a prisoner exchange. I just need to pee. He shook my face and let go so roughly that my head snapped back and hit the drain pipe I was chained to. So pee. I held my breath. Tears threatened to spill, but I would not let the asshole see me cry. Fuck them. Both men retreated and the door was closed again. I struggled to catch my breath. Nothing in the room itself had changed, except that I now knew why they abducted me and that if Serge didn't come for me soon, I was going to die. I didn't know who this Pumpkin was, but he must be someone important. And me. I was just Hannah, a 24-year-old American tourist living off her modest trust fund. I was a nobody. I had faith that Serge would move heaven and earth to rescue me. I didn't know how I knew it or why I was so certain, only that I was. But what if an exchange of captives was beyond his authority? What if he was too late? I had a mental image of Serge opening a parcel and finding my severed head inside. Tears burned my eyes. I knew that he'd suffer, just like I knew I didn't want my life to end before I got the chance to spend several decades with the man. I wasn't ready to die. A great sob choked my throat, and I buried my face in the crook of my elbow to keep as quiet as possible. I no longer wanted to annoy my captors. They might kill me faster. I knew that Serge would save me, if he could. Wars are fought over women like you. He would fight for me. Even though I didn't fully understand all this mate talk, I knew it was true. I was his mate. He was my mate. If I lived, I would be sure to tell him that. He was mine. I sagged against the sink and continued fighting tears and panic. They wouldn't help anything. I needed to focus on staying alive. I didn't travel halfway across the world, carrying my hollow soul, meet the love of my life, the man who fills my soul, only to end up dead in some dirty, smelly Russian bathroom before we even have a chance to get to know one another. No way was I going out like that. I started yanking at the pipe with renewed vigor. I was going to save myself. I wasn't becoming a statistic. Fuck that. It didn't matter that I was outnumbered, outgunned, and quite possibly outsmarted. I was motivated. I had a polar bear mate that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I couldn't die. Not now when life was just beginning. I sank down as far as I could get and braced my feet against the wall behind the sink. I yanked and pulled and tugged for all I was worth. Time passed. I took breaks. I pulled more. The cycle continued until I could barely move my legs, and my wrists had turned bloody and raw. Still, I fought in spurts to free myself. I froze when the door was pulled open again. Crooked Nose stood there, a gun in his hand, as he looked in at me. His other hand held a phone, and he pointed it at me.
See, she's still alive. Feisty one, isn't she? She's been fighting to break free for hours. Just so you know, that blood, she did that to herself.
He pointed the camera at my wrists and then back to my face.
Her face is still pretty, though.
I hissed at him. What the fuck are you doing? Serge's voice filled the room suddenly, dark and deadly.
I'll rip your fucking head off.
Serge? Serge? Crooked Nose crouched next to me and held up his phone for me to see the screen. He switched the camera so it was capturing both of us.
Bring me Vasya Pumpkin, and I won't fuck up her face.
He smiled while reaching over and patting my cheek roughly.
Not too badly.
I heard a loud growl come from the cell phone.
You are fucking dead.
I believed Serge. Crooked Nose didn't have a chance. I stared into the camera, wanting Serge to see into my heart. Just in case he didn't make it to me in time, I wanted him to know that he made me feel whole. I opened my mouth to say it aloud, but before I could speak, Crooked Nose brought the phone back to his ear and growled.
Bring him, or we begin dismembering her.
Chapter 18. Hannah. Not even 15 minutes passed since the phone call was disconnected when I heard raucous sounds from the other side of the bathroom door. It sounded as though all hell was breaking loose out there. I tried to move as far away from the door as I could, swallowing the screams that wanted to tear free from my throat. The chaos on the other side terrified me. Loud screams, snarls, grunts, thuds, and sharp thwacks. Minutes later, when the door was yanked clean off its hinges, I did scream. I couldn't help it. I screamed all the air from my lungs and buried my face in my bent knees. I couldn't look. If I was going to die, I'd rather not watch. A gruff, husky, growly voice called out, "Mine." Serge. My eyes flew open and I jerked upright. My Serge stood over me, naked and dripping blood. His eyes were glowing and his teeth were bared. He leaned down and with one tug ripped the drain pipe right out of the wall, then scooped me into his arms. He held me tightly as he carried me out of the bathroom. I saw for the first time where I was being held. For some reason, I thought it was an old home. It wasn't. We were inside a large warehouse, and its walls were now painted in blood. I took one look at the dark red puddles on the cement floor and the streaks on the walls and squeezed my eyes shut, using the crook of my elbow as a blindfold. "I'm sorry you had to see that, Hannah, but they'll never hurt you again. They're all dead." I knew that the blood covering his body was soaking into my clothes, but I couldn't stop myself from pressing against him tighter. The need to hold on to him was so great. "Is any of it your blood?" "No." I released a huge relieved breath, and the floodgates opened. I could no longer hold back the tears. That was when I started crying. "I knew you'd come." "Always." Without releasing me, he climbed into the back of a vehicle, keeping me in his lap. His arms remained around me, holding me tightly against him. I shivered as my emotions poured forth. "I knew you wouldn't leave me or abandon me." "Never, my mate, never." "We're headed to the nearest safe house, boss. We can get cleaned up there. Con and Max have gone ahead to hand off, Eagle to another team." The man who spoke to us from the driver's seat was covered in blood and appeared to be naked too. He continued to stare at us for another minute or so before putting the vehicle into drive. "Thank you, Roman." I had questions. I wanted to know what had happened, who was Pumpkin, and how he'd found me, but I could wait. I rested my head on Serge's bloody shoulder. "You really, really need a shower." As we drove away, I felt Serge's body finally start to release some tension. Still, it wasn't until we were inside the large house, standing under the hot spray of the shower, that he finally relaxed completely. He sank to his knees in front of me and buried his face in my stomach. Still fully clothed, I held onto his head and shuddered. Shoulders slightly shaking, tears filled his eyes as he looked up at me and shook his head. "It won't ever happen again. I'm so sorry." Stroking his face, I swallowed a sob. "Are you okay?" Now I am. If anything had happened to you, I would have scorched the earth. Scorched the fucking earth. Based on what I saw of that warehouse, I kind of think you did. He huffed a laugh that held no hint of mirth. "Hannah, I haven't done this well enough. I should have done better. You deserve better." I started to say something, to tell him I disagreed, but he cut me off. "You need to know how much you mean to me. Without you, I would die. Without you, I would gladly die." I sank to my knees in front of him and buried my face into his chest. "I think you proved that by rescuing me. I doubt you'll let anything like that happen again." "You're right. I'm never letting you out of my sight again." I fought back a smile. "That's probably not the most practical solution." "You are mine." My fingers threaded through his wet hair. "And you're mine." "You own me, Hannah, from Oklahoma. I might as well be lassoed, hog-tied, and branded." He planted a soft kiss on my lips. "I've never been more terrified in my life." I nuzzled against him. "Me either. You came for me so fast, though. Nothing happened to me." He took my hands in his, looked at the skin on my wrists, and bared his teeth again. I watched as white fur started to erupt on his face, arms, and chest. I knew it was his bear trying to come to the surface. You were hurt. I stroked his chest and shook my head. I did that to myself, trying to rush the escape plan. I didn't realize you were on your way, or I would have just kicked back and relaxed. My attempt at levity didn't seem to lighten his mood any. I failed. He stood, pulling me up with him, and began removing my wet clothes. Most of the blood had washed away. I let you out of my sight, and you could have been killed. You can't keep me at your side 24/7. I laughed. He didn't. We'll talk about it later. Right now, I just need to touch you, Hannah, everywhere. He lifted me into his arms, and as my legs wrapped around his waist, backed me against the shower wall so his hands were free. The wall was cold, but when Serge began kissing me, I hardly noticed. He had my entire focus. I clutched his head as he trailed kisses down my neck and over my breasts. Arching into him, I silently begged for more. Don't run from me again. I won't. Promise me. I won't run from you again. I promise. I gasped when his hands slid under my open thighs, holding me aloft as he knelt, his face level with my core. His tongue swiped along my folds. Mine. My eyelids fluttered closed, and my head fell back against the shower wall. Yours. Chapter 19. Serge. I held the phone away from my ear and winced as the caterwauling coming from it nearly burst my eardrum. After 45 minutes, or what felt like that long, I finally disconnected Chernov's call and released a labored breath. The rest of the team was seated in the living room of the safe house. All eyes were on me. I didn't feel nearly as shitty as I probably should have. I'd made decisions that sabotaged our mission, tarnished the team, and put our charge in potential danger. But I couldn't find it in myself to care. At least, not the way I should. Hannah was safe, and she was mine. That was all that mattered to me. I have good news and bad news. Roman made a rolling motion with his hand, urging me to get on with it. And? Final verdict? I was cut off before I finished as a few guesses about our fate were fired off. Shit-canned? Rank stripped? Gulag? Everyone turned to scowl at Dmitri, who just shrugged. What? None of the above. I paused, cleared my throat, and continued. I have accepted full responsibility for the failure of this mission. The rest of you will be reprimanded, but I negotiated your disciplinary action down to nothing more than a slap on the wrist. I rolled my neck, trying to keep my disposition light as I delivered the news. Nothing you're not already used to. Dmitri and Constantine exchanged glances. Maxim stood and crossed the room. And you? I let out a slow breath. I will be replaced as your team leader. You guys will go on as a P.O.L.A.R unit, but with a new team leader in place. I'll be assigned a desk job somewhere. I faked a smile. Hey, it's not the Gulag, right? Wait, what? Roman sat up, his face turning red with indignation. No fucking way. No, I'd rather be sent to the Gulag. Although Roman was the one to speak, I could see by their faces that the others mirrored his sentiments. I held up both hands, trying to calm them before this escalated. Look, I'm the one who fucked up. I made the decisions that led to a failed mission. Even if I hadn't, as the team leader and alpha, the buck stops here. I'll be honest, I had to pull strings to accept the brunt of the punishment and keep the brass from coming down on the unit as a whole, which, again, is my decision to make. Maxim stilled. You'd so easily break up the team. I sighed. It's the only way. He looked like he was about to argue. Look, I did what I had to do. I ran my fingers through my hair. You guys are more than my team. You're my brothers, you know that. I can't let you all pay the price for my choices. Alexei scowled at me. It was unusual to see anger on his normally easygoing face, but it was there now. "Who the fuck do you think we are?" he scoffed, staring daggers at me. "You think we're a bunch of pussy-ass cowards?" Roman crossed his arms over his chest. "He thinks we can't stand together and take what's due us as a team." His eyes narrowed and he shook his head. "Any one of us could have spoken up about you chasing after your mate. We all knew what was going on. Did you hear any of us say one word about it? One fucking word? No, you didn't." Dmitri stood up and clapped me on the back. "Would you change the outcome if you could?" "Besides avoiding Hannah's kidnapping," I shook my head. "Not a goddamn thing." "Same. This is the hand we were dealt. We'll play it. Besides, you've covered for us and bailed our asses out so many times." The rest of the team mumbled staunch agreements. Constantine picked up his beer from the coffee table. "Call them back and tell them we're all demanding to be held responsible for this, and we refuse to work under another team leader." Khan's glower held a challenge. He was daring me to argue. And I wanted to. But as I looked at each of my guys, I saw in their eyes that arguing would be futile. It was rare, the bond we shared. Our species of shifter tended to be loners. But like I'd always known, not only would I give my life for any one of them, they'd do the same for me. So I made the call. Several calls. With my team's continued urging, and it became official. We were being reprimanded as a unit. We didn't know exactly how yet, or when the gavel would fall. That would probably be determined after 11th hour disciplinary meetings, emergency review boards, and the like. But we would remain together as a private operations league. Unfortunately, our togetherness might be spent behind bars in a shifter military prison. No one was under the impression we'd get off lightly for this, and guilt plagued me. But the guys all just laughed it off. "Who knows?" Maxim grinned. "Maybe we'll all end up pushing pencils in the same stuffy office. Hey, we could have adjacent cubicles." Dmitri held up his beer. "Here's to suffering consequences." He looked pointedly at me. "Together." A beat passed, and then Alexei snorted and held up his beer. "Here's to getting our asses reamed. Again." The rest of the guys grabbed their beers. "To suffering consequences together, and to getting our asses reamed again." Because I had something I had yet to do. I slipped away from the team and followed the sweet scent of night-blooming jasmine and musk coming from the back bedroom. Hannah was on the floor doing some sort of stretching when I stepped into the room. The smooth skin of her stomach was exposed, and I watched as my presence registered and goosebumps appeared, dotting her flesh. She smiled at me. "Hey." "Hey." I smiled back. "What are you doing?" "Well, I decided to start an exercise regimen. Actually, I decided to join a gym, but I figured I needed to wait to see what happened with your phone call first." Hannah knew all about the hot water I was in because I'd broken protocol. "Yeah, about that." Her expression changed to one of dread. She quickly stood, perching on the end of the bed. "What? Just say it. Whatever it is, just tell me." "We're being reprimanded as a team. We don't know exactly how yet. We're awaiting word." She was quiet for a few beats, then she looked up at me with wide eyes and a set jaw. "If it's a prison sentence, I'll be waiting when you're released. If it's reassignment, I'll go wherever you go." Floored, I moved closer to her. "You'll go where I go?" We hadn't really discussed our plans for the future. I knew my future would be spent with Hannah in it, but I didn't know how hard I would have to work at convincing her of that. "I'd go with you if you said you were reassigned to Mars." She tapped the claiming mark on the side of her neck. "Married, right? No divorce. I'm holding you to that." I scooped her in my arms, spun us around, and dropped on the bed so we both landed sprawled across it. Rolling over, I pinned her beneath me. Wars are fought over women like you. I kissed her forehead. Titles seized. I kissed the tip of her nose. Kingdoms vanquished. My hand ran up her thigh as I kissed the scarred skin of her claiming mark. I needed to be in her soon, or I was going to combust. I'd battle any enemy for you, Hannah.
I know that, Serge.
Her eyes glistened with unshed tears.
I know you would.
Chapter 20. Hannah.
Hannah 2.0 was an unapologetically ballsy bitch. Which wasn't all that hard, since having Serge as a mate meant being bombarded with the most reassuringly positive affirmations every single day. He didn't even have to say a word. It was in the things he did, the way he looked at me, and the way he touched me. We'd been at the safe house for a week now. I just hung with the guys, awaiting word from the organization as to their fate. Serge brushed a strand of hair off my cheek.
What are you thinking about?
We were still lying in bed after a long morning of lazy lovemaking. How lucky I am to have you, he chuckled.
Even though I travel with a bunch of testosterone-fueled alpha males?
I laughed. The guys weren't so bad, although he was right about the alpha male thing. They were fun to talk to, though, and never once made me feel unwelcome. I was growing attached to each one and really wanted them to like and accept me. I reached over and grabbed my phone from the nightstand. I kept hoping for a text from Hyacinth, but nothing. I knew better than to hold my breath. Hyacinth, who was now essentially my mother-in-law, took off for Kazakhstan with only a short text saying goodbye. That was last Tuesday. Knowing Hyacinth, she'd probably visited 3 countries since then. I still can't believe Hyacinth is your mom. But all that stuff you said about your mom being human and your dad abandoning you both, it does kind of explain a lot. Hyacinth never told me what she was running from or why she lived, in her words, like a college student. But after what Serge told me about her and his dad, I could kind of understand her never choosing to commit to one place long enough to call it home. I knew how deeply abandonment cut. Serge raised a brow. Well, I wonder...
Nah. Wonder what? He rolled over on his side and pulled me against his body, spooning me from behind. Come on, spill.
Well, it was Hyacinth who convinced me to go on the trans-Siberian trip with her. And that was no easy feat. She practically twisted my arm, so I was wondering... You don't think she planned for this to happen? Me and you, I mean? He snorted a laugh.
Look, my mom's a kook. I love her, don't get me wrong, but she's a kook.
Then he scratched his chin and contemplated my question.
You know, I can't completely discredit the idea.
Our conversation was cut short when Serge groaned and flopped onto his back. What's up?
Our presence is requested in the living room. Seems the team received a package.
Ah, the guys were talking telepathically again. It was hard to get used to that, but not any harder than seeing them all shift into massive polar bears, something I'd witnessed twice so far. Dmitri looked up when we entered the living room.
A box was just delivered. It was couriered from the organization.
Dmitri slit the packing tape and unfolded the cardboard flaps as the rest of the guys stood around watching anxiously. Maxim's forehead wrinkled in confusion. Then he reached into the box and pulled out a rubber sandal.
What the hell kind of shoes are these?
I giggled. They're called flip-flops. They're beachwear. He rifled through the box for its mate and passed the pair to Constantine. Well, not Arctic beaches, obviously. I shrugged. Beaches with hot sun, sand, and palm trees. Serge wrapped his arm around me and pulled me against his side.
But what did they send them for? Hey, look, there's even a teeny tiny pair for you, Hannah. Alexei held up a pink, glittery flip-flop. Aw, look at the little itty-bitty flippy-floppy. How cute. Alexei's baby talk elicited a warning growl from Serge, but Alexei just laughed and handed the flip-flop to me. I was beyond flattered to be included in the group. For me? Really? Alexei dug in the box for the matching flip-flop. Well, you're one of us now. I expected the other guys to object, but to my surprise, there were nods of agreement all around. Dmitri smiled. Part of the family, Hannah. Maxim winked. That's right, sis. These guys were more than teammates to one another. They were brothers. They were a family. And they were including me as part of that family. Tears welled in my eyes. I wanted to say something, to thank them, tell them I appreciated them, let them know how honored I was. But I was so choked up, it was hard to swallow over the lump in my throat. Roman pulled the slip of paper out of the box. Hey, there's a note from Chernov in here. He held it up while we all crowded around to read over his shoulder. Enjoy the subtropics, fucknuts. Your new duty station will be Sunkissed Key, Florida. Report within the next 72 hours. The end. We hope you enjoyed this prequel. Please stay tuned for Book 1 of the P.O.L.A.R series, Rescue Bear. Thank you for listening. This has been Team Leader Bear Shifter Romance, the prequel in the P.O.L.A.R series, written by Candace Ayres, narrated by Maeve York. Stay tuned for Book 1 in the series, Rescue Bear.